Hello again, friends. And you are my friends, and welcome to another edition of 605, the Superpodcast, the only podcast on Turner Time. The Mothership! The best wrestling podcast on the planet, the only wrestling podcast that matters. Call somebody. I am your host, the great Brian Last.
It's me!
The hardest working man in wrestling podcasts.
Yeah! Baby.
And I'm very happy to be joined by the war cry screaming man himself.
Yeah!
No, not Dr. Jerry Graham, but one of the most popular co-hosts we've ever had, my very good friend, Vandal Drummond, Lucky Pierre. Trying to remember some of the other ones.
Oh, let's see. The HIV kid.
That was the next one you had on the list? Jimmy Cyclone.
Jimmy Cyclone. Rockin' Jerry Brown, which I'm sure Al Timko spent all night thinking up that name. RUR 2000. Where's some other ones? Oh, Yom Ripper, the Hasidic assassin, who Harley racist force-fed him pork rinds.
How did you somehow leave? You're talking to one of the great Jews of all time. How did you somehow leave off every single show you've ever been on? By the way, I'm talking to Kurt Brown, ladies and gentlemen. How did you leave off the shows that one of the characters you played was Yom Ripper?
Yes. I had a mask made that had the Jewish star on the forehead and had a yarmulke. And, whenever I'd be getting my butt kicked when I was about to make my comeback, I'd scream, "Never again, never again." And
that's awful.
That is awful. That is awful. And what was more awful is how dim some of the people in the audience. This guy right at ringside is saying, "Well, never again, what?" And so I couldn't think of anything clever. So in the spirit of freewheeling Franklin freak, I looked at it and says, "I fucked your mother, asshole."
Well, that's the Dr. Jerry Graham answer if there ever was one.
Absolutely.
Who's the babyface and who's the heel?
It was all Ripper was always the babyface. The other one I forgot was I was Telly Evangelist, and I had a grudge match with Jesus Christ, who was angry that this televangelist is just on TV trying to make money and trying to spread the good word. And he schooled me well. He schooled me very well.
Wow. Well, there you go. You really are the jack of all trades of incredibly strange wrestlers.
And I think even more than identities, I think I've probably gone to the ring under using different ring music all the time. I think I've lost count of all the entrance music I used. The one that was the most effective was Frenzy by Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, awesome. So on a lucha show, I used it as my entrance music, and they liked the entrance music even better than they liked me because after every fall, whether I won or lost, they kept on playing Frenzy over the speakers.
How many kids did Screamin' Jay Hawkins have?
I heard at first I thought it was like 37, and then it went up to 60-something.
Like doubled, yeah.
Oh, my God. He holds a special place in my heart. The very first concert Elena and I went to as a couple was Screamin' Jay Hawkins at the Palomino in 1985. It was the perfect venue for it. Every seat was up close, almost next to him.
Oh, beautiful. That's great. And I have nothing.
Well, then I say, yeah!
Well, Kurt, it's great to have you back on the show. We've kicked things off pretty spectacularly so far. And there's so much going on in the world of the Super Podcast and the world of Arcadian Vanguard. We're not going to do the top 10 this week. As I mentioned last week, we're retooling the top 10. It will be back, I believe, next week, but stay tuned to facebook.com/superpodcast for your ability to vote for the top 10 and also news about the upcoming occurrences of the top 10. We do have a potential new character. I have not heard this character yet, but I understand he wants to be on the show next week. So a new candidate for the top 10 will be reincarnated King Curtis. More information to come.
That's golden. That is golden.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how golden it is when it has its chance to appear on the show. But another one a lot of people have been asking me about since last week's show was Howard Baum's bad Don Morocco impression. Although it wasn't really that bad, but it was kind of the way he kind of said it was bad. But A lot of people really liked it, so we may try to do something with Don Morocco. We'll see. You have any Don Morocco thoughts, Kurt?
As a matter of fact, Don Morocco was the very first professional wrestler I met in my life.
Wow, really?
Yeah, he worked the LA territory for a really short time. I think got the America's title, dropped it, and then he headed up to San Francisco to work Roy Shire. And I was familiar with Shire's wrestlers because my mom at the time was working up in Sacramento, which is Northern California. So I'd see LA wrestling during the week, and then I'd see Northern California wrestling on the weekends when my dad and I went to visit my mom. And my oldest brother, Eric, who is a lifelong surfer, he was a quintessential 60s guy. He hung in Laguna Beach when the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was at its height. And, he was quite the wild man, an amazing artist. His wife of, over 35 years, almost 40 years, I think, she was very hippie-ish, except she was not a fan of drugs of any kind. And so when he realized that she was no nonsense, he got his act together, became an architect. But that's just painting the picture of the guy who was responsible for me meeting Don Morocco. They lived up in Santa Cruz, California, and every now and then they would have me come out and hang with them for the weekend. And my brother's talking to me on the phone, just saying, "Hey, Kurt, I have a friend he's renting a house in Santa Cruz, and you're not going to believe it, but there's a professional wrestler who he's rented his house to." And I'm like, "What? A wrestler? Really?" And he says, "Oh God, what's his name? He's called like Corky or something." And I'm going, "Corky?" The only thing better was if he said the Slip House Boy. But he says, something like Corky Dan. I'm like, "Oh, Cocky Don Morocco." And I'm like, "Oh my God, how amazing it would be to meet Cocky Don Morocco." He had just been given that moniker after turning heel up there. And so my brother, I give him huge props because he could not stand wrestling. He was just like, "Why are you watching this garbage?" But he drove me to the house, and he said, "Kurt, wait in the car." And he knocks on the door.
Hi, Corky Dan.
Corky Dan, yeah, there's Corky Dan. Corky Dan opened the door, and they're talking a bit, and I have a feeling, he never told me what he said to Don Morocco, but I think he was probably saying something, "My little brother is out of his mind. He, loves wrestling. Please try not to laugh when you see his butterscotch plaid pants that look like Felix the Cat's magic bag, bad haircut, oversized glasses." I was Squaresville, man. Very different than I am now. I believed all those drug scare films about marijuana and stuff like that. And so I think my brother was just saying it would mean the world to him if he could just meet you. So he waves me and his wife over, and we go in there, and suddenly, like, my legs are shaking. I'm so freaked out. I shake his hand, and I wish I knew the wrestler's handshake back then, because mine was probably a pretty limp dandy of a handshake, and I probably could have gotten on the in right away. But we walk into the living room. He's there with his wife, and I think it was a daughter. She was a baby, or he. I can't remember which actually. And you look in the room, and it's hippie haven. There's all these just hippies hanging out in the place, one stretched across the couch, one on the bed, and there are roach clips everywhere. And I'm just sitting there like, what are those little tiny cigarette things? Like, why are they leaving those around? And there was this tiny chair that Morocco sat in. It was supposed to be like the baby's chair, but his wife says, she said something funny like, "Yeah, it's the baby's chair, so he's the one who sits in it all the time," And I am just shaking, and I can't think of anything to say, and I'm like, how many times a week do you wrestle? And he was so laid back, and he was awesome. I mean, he just says, 4 or 5 times a week, and he's asking me like, hey, where are you from? And I was in Ralph Cramden mode where I'm just going hum, and I'm the chef of the future. Then the conversation got flowing, but not with me and Don Morocco. My brother and Don Morocco, because they start talking about the best places to surf in the Santa Cruz area. But I always will have a soft spot in my heart for Don Morocco because he made this uber nerd totally proud. Not proud, but happy. Made my day. Made my month. I met a real live wrestler. There were 2 or 3 times I saw him at events at Cauliflower Alley, and I didn't have the gumption to go and say, hey, do you remember a very odd kid wearing strange clothes?
Oh, you gotta. Come on. You gotta. Because, again, it wasn't like you were just some kid. He'll remember you maybe because you were the brother.
That's true. And actually, as I've been thinking about it the last couple of weeks, I think, if I do run into him again, I think I might bring it up. And, he made my day. What an awesome guy, And that was back in the days when sometimes heels would be heelish to fans even in public. I guess I heard Tolis was famous for that in his heyday. But no, he totally made me feel at ease. And as we're driving away, my brother's saying, so what do you think of all those roach clips in there? I'm going, roach clips? What are those? And I'm like, oh, my God, they were smoking marijuana.
See, that's what you do. You go up to him and go, excuse me, Mr. Morocco, or Corky Dan, whatever I may refer to you as. Just want to shake your hand. I'm Kurt Brown. You probably don't remember this, but many, many years ago, you had a property you were staying at, and I came up there, and he introduced us, and that was the first time I was ever around marijuana, when I was underage at your house. It's great to meet you. Where's the good surf nowadays? See what
exactly.
He says. Yeah.
Well, and since then, I've more than made up for my drug scare silliness. Well, I think once I realized how idiotic those films they showed in our health class in junior high were, I was a very naive kid, but I made up for lost time after that.
He's certainly on my short list of like all-time wrestlers that I would like to smoke a joint and have a beer with. I think Don Morocco would be near the top because he's just so laid back.
Yes. Yeah. I agree.
I grew up on a beach also, so I understand the whole mentality of flip-flops year-round, and let's just have a couple of beers and catch some waves.
One of the greatest years of my life was I was kind of in between jobs trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and my folks bought a house in Seal Beach. My mom always dreamed of living by the beach, and so I went there to crash for a few nights, and they were saying, well, you're trying to figure out what you want to do with school, with work. You can stay here for a while. I'm going, holy shit, yeah. Half a block from the beach for a year was beautiful.
Hey, let me ask you this, Kurt. How long was your mom working at that job? Like, how often were you going so that you could watch Northern California wrestling from San Francisco? Like, when did you start watching big-time wrestling? What year?
Early in 1974. That's when my mom got the job, and she was there until 1978. And it was great because I got to see Shire's promotion and LaBelle's promotion almost simultaneously. And I'd see Louis Tilley as the America's champ in L.A., and then he would, be a jobber on Northern California TV.
Yeah, where he wasn't booking. He was the jobber.
Exactly. Well, and even Pat Patterson, when Pat Patterson would come, there were 2 times he came to L.A. in the mid-'70s and put people over on TV. So it was kind of my first sight into, different territories, using each other's talent and the way that suits their, promotion best. The part that totally confused me was the crowd reaction sounded much different than it looked because they had canned audience cheering.
Oh.
So you'd see the people into it somewhat, but you'd hear like this, yeah, go get them, go get them. And then years later, fast forward to 1989 when Red Bastien started the Win promotion, the Lucha promotion here in Southern California. And he got TV and he, was telling me this is going to be really good because the guy who edited the Northern California wrestling show for Shires is going to be editing this. I'm going, Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Mike Lano. I'm sorry. He didn't edit the show. He just stole someone's collection of the tapes. I forgot. I got confused. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yo, yo, yo. What's up?
There he is.
Oh, my God.
By the time you're watching that, 74, so Stevens isn't really there anymore. Stevens is in the AWA, right?
Yeah, he came back for a while in 76, and I don't know how long he was there. I'm drawing kind of a blank, but that was the first time I saw just how huge he was and how people dug him. And same when I saw him at Cal Powell's in 1979. I went up there for the Battle Royal show, and he had a match against Ron Pope.
Oh, my God, the best worker versus the worst worker?
Yes, and Stevens knew what to do. They shake hands, and then Ron Pope Pearl Harbors him, beats him up for like 30 seconds. Then Stevens makes this dynamite comeback and pins him. I don't think it was even 2 minutes, but the crowd was ecstatic. He was Ray Stevens. He could do no wrong.
Yeah. That's how over the Mongolian Stomper was in Memphis in 75 before they, went back with Lawler as the top guy. He sold out the Mid-South Coliseum with Ron Pope, the Magnificent Zulu.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
It actually amazes me how much territory Pope covered considering how bad he was. The only wrestler worse than him was Don Ross, a.k.a. Ripper Savage.
Oh, well, and that's a little bit later. I mean, it's interesting you bring this up. I'm trying to think who would have been before Ron Pope in terms of guys who only had a physique and got chance after chance. I mean, it wasn't like he was pushing for the NWA title when I said chance after chance, but got opportunities in multiple territories, despite the fact he couldn't do anything, but he just had a physique. Is there anyone before him? I mean, there must have been. I'm not thinking.
Oh, I would almost guarantee it. I heard, now, I should know who he is because I've always been curious, but I haven't looked online. I remember there was a dude called Little Abner. I think in the early 70s in the South. And whenever I hear somebody bring them up, they say, oh, my God, how terrible that guy was. I never saw him myself, so I can't say.
Lil Abner reminds me, remember Lil Al? He used to do all the photos for, I guess it would be the Louisiana territory.
Oh, my God. You just opened
Did I?
the door to some great stories.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to try to do it justice. I never met Little Al Vavasseur.
That's right, Vavasseur. Yeah.
But I corresponded with him a bit in the late 70s, along with the other West Coast people like Ron Vallum and his brother Joe and Mike Rogers in Oregon. Well, I can't remember what it was. You would hear from Little Al here and there, and then he'd just kind of disappear, and didn't hear about him for years. And then I heard he was in prison. I'm like, I wonder what he's in prison for.
Uh-oh.
Well, when I went up in '84 to wrestle for Al Timko, Ed Moretti was there. That made the trip totally worth it. And I brought up Little Al, and he just says, "Oh my God!" He said, "You never heard why he was in prison?" I went, "No, I have no idea." And Ed looks at me, and he just has this look in his face like he knows just this one sentence is going to be a grand slam. He was arrested for impersonating Gene Kiniski.
What? That's not in any way where I thought you were going with this. Who arrested him?
It gets better. It gets better. Gene Kiniski, apparently there were two kinds of people that bugged him. People who were emaciated thin and people who were overweight. And I guess Little Al was overweight. And what he would do, Gene Kiniski was in British Columbia and on the border towns in Washington. Oh, God, what was the name of the town in Washington he lived at? He was like a huge figure, and Moretti told me everybody would all claim that they once lived next door to Gene Kiniski. I heard people say the same thing about Vern Gagne, that if everybody who claimed they lived next to Gene Kiniski really lived next to him, he would be having to move 3 times a week.
Wait, hold on. Are there a lot of people out there claiming they live next to Vern Gagne?
I've heard several people say I have a friend who says they lived next to Vern Gagne way back when, and the first thing I thought of was the Gene Kiniski story. And so what this guy at Little Al was going around doing, he would go to hotels, restaurants, and say he was Gene Kiniski, and like he lost his wallet, and maybe that wasn't Little Al, maybe that was Little Mike Leno. I guess this worked for a while, and finally found out, and Kiniski, rightfully so, was pissed. So I can't remember how long he did before they caught him, but they caught him, and apparently when Gene Kiniski said that his imposter was somebody who was overweight, apparently he just like lost it and blew a fuse. And Moretti said, if you ever meet Gene Kiniski, Kurt, like I'll pay you if you go up to him and says, "Hey, Mr. Kiniski, you got to go to the carnival next month. They're having a Little Al Vavasseur impersonation contest." It gets better.
No, wait. Well, I still have questions. He was the photographer. I said Louisiana before. I mean, it may have gone into Oklahoma, but it was that territory. It was Leroy McGurk's territory, and he probably crossed over into the early days of Mid-South. I'm not certain, no, but obviously for a long time, any photo you saw that came out of the Leroy McGurk territory, it had Lil Al written on it. You would see
really?
it in the magazines.
I remember seeing his name all over the place. I don't want to cast...
That's why it's puzzling, the fact he's impersonating Gene Kiniski in Louisiana.
Yeah. Better make sure I have the wrong name. I'm 99% sure it was Little Al. And Ed said because when you'd send stuff to the wrestlers who wrestled for Timko, since a lot of the guys, would sometimes stay at a hotel, then stay with a friend, they'd ask family and stuff to send their letters to Al Timko's mailbox. And suddenly all the wrestlers get letters from Little Al, and I don't know if they were all worded the same, but the one that Ed Moretti either received or saw somebody receive says, "I am being held prisoner against my will, but your cards and letters can get me out."
So wait a minute. Okay, so now it's getting even better. So now the photographer in Louisiana who's in jail is writing letters to the wrestlers for Al Tomko in Canada, asking for their...
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't want to cast any false accusations, but I'm wondering if he kind of pulled a Leno and put his watermark on other people's photos. Or...
I don't know. Well, Leno really does have that impression, that reputation, doesn't he?
So maybe next year at the 605 convention, we can have Little Al and Mike Leno impersonation contest.
We're going to have like a little booth where you can take your photo, and then by the time you get it, it just says photo by Real Leno at AOL.com right across the front of it. A genuine photo.
For an extra $20, Jenna Jameson will get photoshopped into it.
For an extra $20 to put a Snickers bar in your hand in the photo.
It could be like a scavenger hunt. You have to find the Snicker bar and be able to get it back to the fort without paying for it.
If you pay an extra few bucks, you get a picture. You have Leno in the photo with John Arezzi's mail under his arm.
And chasing down his sister.
Oh, for a few extra dollars, you get the Leno that's in a turban at Gordon Scazzari's TV taping. You get to eat his tie like the Sheik did.
Classic. And I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I can't remember. You've seen Bob Arnett's Leno Mania?
Did I see it? I helped him build. Half that footage came from me.
Awesome.
I was on the Leno train a long time ago. I realized early on, I always liked Mike. He was always good. Mike refuses to come on this show, obviously.
Yeah, I know. He's always nice to me. I will say that.
Very nice guy. But you hear all these stories about how crazy he is. So then you meet him and you're expecting, all right, here comes the crazy. And you're like, no, he's actually really well spoken and seems rather together. I mean, there may be something, a little glimmer in his eyes. Like he was always relatively nice, but he got himself into all these crazy scenarios. And Barnett early on hit me to it. Barnett's like, He's a performance artist. He's a genius. That's what Bob would always say. Bob would always make, he's the best. He's absolutely the best. And he's right, because every single person who's a Mike Lano fan, who enjoys the stories of the various exploits and adventures and misadventures of the disbarred wrestling dentist, every single one of them is a happy person who loves talking about these stories.
There's an angle right there. We have to have the disbarred wrestling dentist on TV and the prankster attorney who won't leave him alone. It's better than anything they have on Raw these days.
We can call it Canvas Cavity.
Yes.
Do they still have public access TV? I guess they do, right?
I don't know. You know what? We got rid of cable about a year ago and just do the whole Hulu, YouTube, Netflix, all that stuff. So it's only in the last couple of months I realized how out of touch I am with just how TV works today.
It really is nuts. I have Fios, which I love. It's Verizon Fios. The TV's great. The packages are great.
Yeah.
The internet is lightning fast. But my cousin always tries to talk me into getting rid of it. He has always kind of been, let's cut the cord and figure out another solution. And now he has, I think it's called PS View. If you're a PlayStation user, there's a PlayStation TV app on the PlayStation, so you can actually pay and watch real TV in real time or DVR it or whatever you want to do.
Oh, interesting.
So he does that, and then he does like Amazon Prime and Netflix and Hulu or whatever else he does. I mean, my big concern was always baseball because of the weird and archaic blackout rules. I wouldn't be able to watch the New York Mets.
Isn't it bizarre?
But they kind of changed it a little bit, but it's still, I think, like, you can access the streaming website for the channel, but you already have to be a subscriber. So it's like, okay, so I can't cut that cord. And I don't know, I'll probably be one of the last people to cut the cord just because.
And one of the things I love is, for the longest time, Elena and I, we have a standing date with my brother-in-law, Amp, and he just downloads tons of stuff off the internet. And one of the things I love is he gets the sumo tournaments every second month. We've been big sumo fans since '95.
Really? You never told me that.
Yeah, I don't think of it. I'm not a sports person in general, but they used to air it on local TV here at 11:30 at night in the '90s. And one night I watched it on the lark, and then because I think I was like a lot of gringos. I had this stereotype of them just being these big hulking guys just plowing into each other. But then when I saw just the grace and just the finesse, and I saw right before Akabono became a Yokozuna, the Musashi Maru, and we never taped it. It didn't matter how early we had to get up for work. Every weeknight at 11:30 during the tournament, we watched every episode, and then it got taken off the air for like 7 years. We couldn't find anything, and then now on YouTube, you just check these out. And my brother-in-law downloads it with English commentary, which I never had before. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, the current, he's out of action for a while, but we started watching again right when the current Yokozuna, or one of the current Yokozunas, Hakuho, a Mongolian, set the record for I think it was the most consecutive tournaments. So it's kind of fun that we got back into it when it's kind of, big time again. For a while, due to several different scandals, I guess popularity was actually low for a few years, and we just happened to find it again when things are hopping.
Well, two questions about this. One, when you watch the English commentary, it's such a complete notch below, just like the Japanese wrestling to English commentary is for wrestling. Like when you go from Japanese sumo commentary to English-speaking sumo commentary, is it just like, I'd rather listen to the Japanese, or you like it?
No, it's fat. I do miss the excitement in the Japanese announcer's voice, even though I can't understand what he's saying. But I have to say, there's 3 different commentators on the feed that we get. They take turns each night. One of them, I think, I think he's British. No, they know the sport. They know everything, and they point out stuff that we never really noticed before. Because there's sometimes you see the wrestlers charge each other, and it looks like one guy just lost his balance and fell. But when the commentator shows in the replay what's going on, he actually points out just these little subtle moves that the other sumo used to get the guy off balance. And I mean, it's really, really cool stuff.
And as a sumo expert, whose side do you take in the dispute between John Tenta and Koji Katao?
From what I've heard of the whole situation, I can't remember how many different viewpoints. It sounded kind of like Tenta was in the right.
Well, what was the story? Katao, they expected him to be the next big star. He's coming out of sumo. They brought him into Tenryu's group. They had a lot of plans for him. He even wrestled at WrestleMania 7. Him and Tenryu beat Demolition. And then he works the
wow, I didn't realize that.
And then he works the match with Tenta, and they're having problems, and then he just grabs the mic and says wrestling is fake and quits, right?
And he was trained by Lou Thez, was one of his trainers.
Yep, that's right.
And of course, what Lou Thez saw wrestling as was not what wrestling was anymore. So I don't know if that helps or hinders.
Right. He certainly dealt with some double crosses or knew the stories from Ed Strangler Lewis of double crosses back in his day. But on this topic of Japan, Kurt, we have to talk about this, and you're the perfect guy to talk to about it. And that is the recent retirement of Manami Toyota. She just retired. And I'm curious, I know she's not Bull Nakano, so you may not be as thorough an expert as you are with your one and true love, Bull Nakano, but let's talk a little bit about her, because I feel somewhat ignorant. I know who she is, and I've seen her stuff and liked it, but I never totally got into Japanese women wrestling for no particular reason. It's just, I didn't. Like, I remember in, I think, 93, maybe 94, I'm forgetting now, but when Dream Slam and Dream Slam 2 happened, like, Meltzer went crazy in The Observer about how good it was. No one went, there was no, like, bite back like there is for the 6-star match. Like, when he was giving all these matches on the show 5 stars, no one argued. And I just...
Well, I think part of that, too, is there was a lot less stuff to see. So, like, you could see any kind of wrestling on the internet today, on TV. There's so many choices that I think people are going to be pickier, where back then, if you had a good tape trader, it was like having a good dope dealer. He could get you the choice stuff. So mid-90s, I saw ECW, I saw All Japan Women, and occasionally I saw Japan. I watched Michinoku Pro since Superboy was there regularly, as was Piloto Suicida. I'll never forget the first match I saw, excepting when they aired All Japan Women in 1977 here in Southern California for a while. Meltzer sent me a tape, said a lot of good stuff on it, think you'll like it, and, had some New Japan World Class. And then he put on it, not telling me, the first battle of the Crush Girls. And I was with my brother-in-law, and we're watching it, and we were on the edge of our seat the whole time, because that was before the days where most matches had, 30 kickouts before the pin.
Yeah.
And so, Shigusa and Lioness Asuka are just giving each other everything. And over again, we said, oh, that's the finishing move. 1, 2, and kick out. And we were like kids watching wrestling for the first time. So, that suplex, now that has to be the end of the match. And we became huge fans, for years. And the first time I saw Manami Toyota, actually, was when I was with Meltzer in Japan. There were no All Japan Women shows being run when we were there, but some of the All Japan Women wrestled at Kurikan Hall with the wrestlers.
Universal?
Universal, yeah. Yeah, the luchadores there. And so that was my first sight of Manami Toyota. She was very good, but, didn't stick out. But over the next few years, yeah, she became one of my favorite wrestlers. Not just female wrestlers, one of my favorite wrestlers ever. And while I was sitting there fawning over Bull Nakano, all my friends were gaga over Manami Toyota. They were just blown away at the moves she did. I mean, fast forward to today, the moves probably look dated. Although I think the matches I haven't watched them in years. I'd like to, because just the passion they put, the way they would sell things, the way the referee would sell an almost 3 count where he's about to hit his hand on the mat for the 3 count and like twist himself so hard not to touch the mat that you'd swear he tore an oblique muscle.
But those matches will hold up. You know why? The thing with matches from the past, one of the things that even if the action isn't what a contemporary fan would be used to, one of the things I think makes it hold up is the crowd. Is when you watch something and it's a screaming crowd and they're totally into every single thing happening, it draws you in. As opposed
Especially
to now.
when you would see little girls crying.
Yeah.
You see little girls crying that their hero was getting beat, you know? And yeah, the very first time I saw Japan Women, like I said, was in 1977 when it aired on one of the local Asian stations. It was a half-hour show. You'd always see 2 matches, and it was unlike anything I ever saw before because the opening segment was Jackie Sato and Maki Ueda singing their Beauty Pair song. It was the best opening for a wrestling show I've ever seen, along with the CMLL TV in the mid-'80s, where they'd show old clips of, you know, El Santo and Blue Demon wrestling to the song Los Luchadores, which is probably the most famous wrestling song in the world. I think it's been covered like 20 times or something by other groups.
The most famous wrestling song in the world. I never thought of that category. I recently got some wrestling vinyl. I don't know if I mentioned this on the show already.
No, do tell.
Yeah, I've tried to increase my collection of wrestling vinyl. I already had a 45 of Gene Carroll and the Shades, and that's Gene Okerlund's Teenage Band. I had that already.
Oh, awesome.
And then I had the wrestling album, and then I had... actually, this is on CD, not vinyl, but I'm going to get it on vinyl. Wade Curtis, with Putty Cat. You know Wade Curtis? Dr. Master Wade Curtis?
I have to plead ignorance here.
Dr. Master Wade Curtis. I'm going to actually look this up so I could actually tell you exactly. Dr. Master, a great start to the name, Wade Curtis. He was like an outlaw manager in the South, but he was in a wheelchair. And he had I don't even know how to describe it, like a backwards hand.
Oh my God, I know who you're talking about because I wouldn't have remembered by his name, but I remember seeing photos of him in, what was the magazine? I think Saul Reingoroth had something publishing it. It was a really lame magazine, but I remember that manager.
Well, that would have been where he worked. Name. Yeah, and before he was a heel manager for some outlaw groups in the South, he put out an album called he put out a single, I should say, called Putty Cat. So here, I'll play you a second of this, Kurt, so you can hear it.
Okay.
This is Putty Cat.
Putty Cat. Mama meow, meow, 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 meow. Putty Cat. Meow. Putty Cat. Meow. Putty Cat. Mama meow, meow, mama meow.
So it keeps going and going.
I would love to take that to a coffee house in San Francisco somewhere. Take out the loud instrumentals and just have somebody beat on some drums while he does his shtick. That's awesome.
It's listed as the answer song to Surfin' Bird. So this is like the response to Surfin' Bird. Putty Cat. Mama meow meow.
That is awesome. Okay, 2 pieces of vinyl I do have. I have a Gentry's album with, obviously, Jimmy Hart on the cover.
Oh, cool.
And I can't remember where I found it, but I found it for $6. And I have the 45 of the Ballad of Moondog Mayne. I think I mentioned that before.
Yeah, I'm jealous of that one.
Yeah. And then I have the 45 that Martine Cardigan put out in the either the late 50s or early 60s, called La Barba Cardigan, like the Barber Cardigan. That was when he had the gimmick where he had put his beard up against another wrestler's beard, and after the match he would give them a formal shave. I mean, where he'd lather them up and shave the beard with a razor.
See, I'm jealous of that one too, although if I was going to get a Titana's NO Ring album, I would want one that had the theme song to El Pibe Diaz. All right, enough of that. That's the one. That's the one I have a stupid love of because of that stupid ring entrance where Pibe Diaz is out there with all the cocaine girls and they're all just doing their own thing and dancing around and he's flipping around. The kids are kissing him. Because of the entrance, I loved it.
And I love when he wrestles the devil, and after the match, after he beats the devil, the heel referee, Senor William Boo, is in there boogieing along with him, dancing away.
And then he gets upset because P.B. Diaz kind of pulls the girls away, like, come on, let's go. Let's get away from William Boo. And then William Boo starts reacting, like, oh, come on, I'm the heel ref, but I just want to dance. But back to the albums. I also have both versions of either I Bite the Songs or Blassie King of Men. I guess it's kind of like the same songs, but packaged differently. You know what I mean?
Yes, I have the Blassie King of Men LP. And I have a Johnny Legend LP. I've never played it since I don't have a turntable, but it's a unique Johnny Legend album because the front of it is a cover of him when he was a kid with a buzz cut years before he had his trademark Fagin beard. I
also have Adrian Street's album. I have the Antonino Rocca album. I have a New Japan album I actually bought off eBay not too long ago because I had like everyone's theme song, like Abdullah, Hogan, Andre, Stan Hansen, but I haven't played it yet. I have that. What am I forgetting? Oh, the Jesse Ventura picture disc.
Oh, cool. I don't have the vinyl, but I have the CD by Beauregard that he did in the 70s. I think it was Greg Sage of the Wipers was one of the guys who was one of the musicians. I think he might have helped produce it, too.
And how could I forget that I have this on vinyl?
Going to wrestling.
A boss called me and said, friend, we could be model for Fredericks of Hollywood, but it's kind of nasty. We were wrestling.
Still the best. Hey, Kurt, before we go too much further, I want to mention a couple things here. Next week on the show, you're going to hear part 1 later on with John Hitchcock, Front Row Section D, a multi-installment series we're going to have here on the Super Podcast. I think everyone's going to love it, and we're going to tell you also about John's book later on in the show. But John Hitchcock will be back next week. Also, Marty Gold, our friend, got in touch with me. It turns out that Dr. X, the alter ego of Brother Midnight, Stan Saxon, did some radio spots for Marty's radio show a while back. So Marty sent me these spots in, and if Brother Midnight makes the top 10 next week, I will play at least one of these spots on the air. So stay tuned for that. And I mentioned I was going through my archives and finding stuff that we never aired, like the Dan Severn interview. I actually found when Marty was on the show, the first, I think, 12 minutes or so of the interview was edited off because that was one of the shows where it was so long, it was ridiculous. So I still have that, his first 12 minutes where he talks about how he got into wrestling. So I'm probably going to play that, if not next week, pretty soon on the show. So stay tuned. More information about all of that coming up. I also want to mention, we talked last week, Kurt, a little bit about how should we kill stuttering Tommy Rich off the show? And I got to say, I was overwhelmed by the reaction it's got on Facebook. Here's what we're going to do, because here's the thing. I said, let's hear what the listeners think. And I didn't come up with any sort of mechanism to actually say, okay, whoever gets the most votes wins or anything. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read some of these on the air, but the rest of them are on the Facebook page. I want the co-hosts and contributors to this show, the active ones, to vote on their favorite. And we're going to take those favorites, and those are going to be the finalists. And the listeners are going to get the vote off those finalists. And we're going to announce the winner on the anniversary show, probably.
Sweet.
So let's read some of these, Kurt. I'll give you an idea of some of these. I haven't looked yet. I've been waiting to do this on the air, so I haven't looked at these
surprise
yet.
package.
The question was, how should stuttering Tommy Rich be killed off the Super Podcast? Jim Pulley II. Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
Jim Pulley II says, choked to death by Jim Barnett. All right, let's move on from there. Okay, here's another Jim Barnett one. Let's move away from the fucking Jim Barnett ones, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Snyder says shot during a liquor store holdup. Rocky Suazo says no. Ryan Stedman says beat up by the real Tommy Rich. Dennis Smith says crushed under the ring by the Big Show. All right, some fantasy booking there.
There you go.
Quinn Voet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly because I guess I just don't see any other way to pronounce that.
It sounds cool, so if that's not the way to pronounce it, I recommend that he pronounce it that way from here on because it sounds really cool.
It is a cool name, Quinn Voet.
Yep.
You're a poet and you didn't know it. He says Stuttering Tommy gets killed by getting hired by the WWE. Chuck Guntner says a public hanging by the Hangman. We haven't mentioned Bruce Pobans on the show in a long time. Hello, Bruce. We hope you are well. Legitimately, hope you are well and doing okay down in Florida. We hope that you didn't have
and good luck on your future international sand sculpturing endeavors.
I just want to point out, Bruce, that was Kurt Brown who said that, not me. I would never, ever.
Yeah, did you hear that, Bruce Pavanovich?
Okay, well, don't mess up his name. That does not make him happy.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that, Mr. Pub Problems.
Seth Berger says, an air mattress explosion under the ring claims 6 is the headline. The lone survivor, a Pabst Blue Ribbon number 3, escaped with minor injuries. This one is not getting read on the air. Big Punch says, Stuttering Tommy died while getting unlicensed dental work from Mike Lano. George,
my vote. That's my vote. That's my vote. I was thinking the perfect way to kill him off is just sheer humiliation, where he's wrestling for the 605 title, and a speech therapist hits the ring, cures him of his stuttering, and everybody's like, "Well, who are you?" I'm stuttering Tommy Rich. Oh, no, that's not him. That's not you. The other thing you could do is if you could get Jim Ross to start doing really bad impressions again, like he originally did. Just have him be stuttering Tommy Rich for a week. He'll be gone. Voted out.
I must admit, I've heard recently from impressionist Jim Ross, who may be wanting to come back on the show very soon. Stay tuned for that, top 10 voters. But here's some more from the listeners. Lee Russell says he does a stand-up comedy show in front of a firing line. Billy Holiday, not that one, says he leaves the show after getting his GED. He declares himself too good for the wrestling business. Sean Akers says he's eaten by Yo Mamba.
Whoever Yo Mamba is.
Some of these are just awful. I mean, the ones, all right, I'm not going to read this one. Paul Husker says Scott Steiner killed him after he asked Steiner to do the dick spot. Jackson Herod, here's the no-brainer. He was killed in a wildfire.
Ba-dum-bum.
And here's another one. Glenn Broggett, friend of the show. Death by Dental, a Mike Leno malpractice joint.
Awesome. Oh, there's 2 winners, I see.
William Harding says The Sugar Hold by Jim Cornette. Of course, William Harding is our Sugar Hold champion. Here's Dan Farron, friend of the show, friend of Kurt Brown, friend of mine.
Yes. Howdy, Dan.
Falls down a flight of stairs at an autograph show, passes away when it takes him 6 hours to cry out for help. So there we go with that. And yeah, there's more and more and more. There's just so many here. There's so many. It's ridiculous. It just keeps going. Someone made a phony headstone. There's a headstone right here. Hey, Swami, I'm recording. Why are you clawing at me? You want to come up here? Come here.
You swore you would protect your Swami.
My Swami, my beautiful Swami. I love this. He just got his first grooming the other day. His first pro grooming, other than Suzanne.
And how did he react? Because with our cats, the first time we'd ever groomed them, they'd come home feeling like out of sorts.
He was so nervous, and it was worse than bringing my kids to the first day of school. Dropping him off and leaving him there, because he didn't know what was going on, and he was so nervous, and it broke my heart. Aww. And they said it could take up to 3 hours depending on how he deals with it and everything. And they called me within an hour. They said, he's great. Come back and get him. And I went and I got him, and he was happy, and he's very fluffy right now. But there he is, and he's right now. Everyone else is sleeping, so he's like sitting down in the office next to me when he's not clawing at me. Here's a couple more here. Someone just put the video, Joe Lawson, he wrote MASH series finale, and then he wrote, then he put the video for Casino when Joe Pesci and his brother get killed out in the bushes. Steve Ankowitz says an STD from Sue the Shooter. I mean, it's just so
I like
many.
That, yes.
There's so many here. I don't even know how to go through all these, but.
And there's more to come, I could guarantee you, especially after reading these.
I keep scrolling down. There's just more and more and more.
Pay dirt, man.
Well, anyway.
Speaking of 605 community, I meant to mention this earlier. Just want to say I went to a local indie show where I saw 605 friend and member Johnny Trejo on one of the matches at Steve Payne's House of Pain. And he did a very good job. He's green still wet behind the ears, but did very, very well and didn't try to get 100 spots in, and was very, very impressed. And he has said on an upcoming show that when he makes a comeback, he's going to let out the war cry.
Well, good on Johnny Trejo.
Yeah, nice, very nice guy too. It was really good to chat with him, and it looks like a student who's actually following the teacher's lesson, which is awesome stuff in this day and age.
Oh, I like this one. Here's the last one I'm going to read on the air this week. David Jordan. Ted Arcidi yells, "Sour grapes!" at him until he drinks himself to death. Anthony Idol. He's taken out by not Buzz Sawyer. So that's good too. I have not, there's so many of these. This is crazy. Wow, thank you guys. You guys are amazing. There's so much stuff here. So everyone, Kurt, you, Scott Cornish, all the usual co-hosts, please check in. Let me know what your vote is from this list that's on the Facebook page, facebook.com/superpodcast. And those will be the finalists that the listeners can vote on. One more note about next week's show and the top 10. I said last time I wanted to hear listener suggestions about how to improve things. And I heard, again, overwhelming reaction from everyone. Thank you. No matter what you thought, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to let me know, because this show is built on the listeners and the relationship with the listeners. So I really appreciate everyone taking a little bit of time to help me make sure the show stays fresh. Thank you, everyone, for that. So next week, Kurt, we're going to do away with the fantasy booking. The overwhelming reaction was enough with the fantasy booking, and I must admit I was feeling the same thing. So next week, we'll do the top 10 voting, but no fantasy booking. So if you want to still put your fantasy booking on the Facebook page, please feel free. People probably will enjoy reading it, but it won't be on the show. So I just want to give everyone a little heads up on that.
Oh, can I take a minute to say how fucking cool Scott Cornish is? That guy.
I'm sure he'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Oh, he's so awesome. First time I heard him, be the guest host, I thought he was great, but then he comes with the beep beep, and I was doubled over laughing. And he just gets better all the time. And then on top of that, I put on my Facebook page. You might have seen me do this. If I have a good string of 5 iPod songs on my iPod random mix, I'll just post them on Facebook. And being Halloween, one of them was Hands of Jack the Ripper by Screaming Lord Sutch.
Oh yeah.
And in the comment section, Scott Cornish puts a photo of Screaming Lord Sutch's grave. He and a friend went to Pinner New Cemetery to visit the final resting place of Screaming Lord Sutch. It's so... I've met people from Europe who know who he is. It's rare I come across somebody who not only knows who he is, but visits his grave. And it's so awesome. It's like my tastes. I mean, I like a lot of mainstream stuff, but then I'm the only person. No, there's one other person I'm friends with who loved the movie Skidoo and thought it was a brilliant work of art. Most people who remember the late actor Nigel Terry remember him as King Arthur in Excalibur. No, I like him. My favorite role of his was as Harry Mandrake in My Partner the Ghost, the agoraphobic hippie. And then all the people who were in the documentary Mondo Hollywood, D and F-list celebrities I am intrigued by. And Cornish, you're fucking cool. I bet you he has a whole treasure trove of people that I know of and that some of the other listeners know of, but they think they're the only ones who know this great secret.
Yeah, do me a favor. Stop saying how great Scott is, because he'll quit the show or something, and it'll...
Okay, he's fabulous.
Yeah,
then.
Stop building him up. Stop building him up. No, Scott is tremendous.
Okay, Scott Cornish. Since I'm bad at imitations, Scott Cornish, I fuck your ass.
What?
I humble you. Iron Sheik.
Okay, I didn't know where you were.
I can't imitate him, so I say it civilly. Oh, wait, but what am I thinking of? Okay, if I want to bring him down a bit, I'll just tell him that you have committed the 3 incestuous sins that are just abhorred by Dr. Jerry Graham.
Homosexual Jim.
Is that one of the sins?
Well, if the brother is impregnated, yes. I guess it's okay to cornhole your brother if he's not with child.
Let's spend the night together.
That is awesome. One of my favorite Sullivan clips. I love it.
Yeah, I got to get Kevin Sullivan to name more Rolling Stones songs on the show.
Oh, I got to tell you, the combination of a story I read back in like ring wrestling on Kevin Sullivan, like when he was a rookie, and Chris Colt is what got me to give Janis Joplin a listen for the first time. Because in the story, Kevin Sullivan was talking about what a huge Janis Joplin fan he is, and then I saw Chris Colt was, and I said, "Hey, I got to hear this woman," and man, she's one of my favorites to this day.
I could be wrong because I know Chris Colt he worked for Joe Cocker, but I think I read something that he knew Janis Joplin too. Am I wrong?
I think I heard that too. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it was just met her a few times or was friends, but yeah, I think there was some connection. But no, he did everything short of having a shrine to her. Joe Cocker and Janis Joplin, he lived and died for them.
Well, a few other news and notes here at the top, Kurt. One thing I want to mention is, and I mentioned this on Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, I believe was the show this week. If any of the listeners out there have any copies of Weasel's World, the Norm Dooley newsletter, please get in touch with the show. I would love to see them. Jim Cornette would love to see them. It's like one of those weird things, like Jimmy said on the show. It's like when Norm Dooley went away, all the copies of his newsletter disappeared off the planet.
And I point my finger to Jim Cornette saying that is such a great idea for like a Twilight Zone-ish short story. That's somebody who, when he vanishes, so does his great work. And Weasel's World of Wrestling was great, great work. I so looked forward to those newsletters, and like Jim Cornette, I have no idea what happened to mine. I have like a 2-pager, not even a complete newsletter. I found it amongst a bunch of stuff, and I put that on Facebook at some point. But I could scream because I don't know if they're locked up somewhere, and I just don't know where they are in the house. Norman Dooley was the first person I knew who put humor into a newsletter, not just put humor into a newsletter, but made it funny. I mean, I especially looked forward to seeing his reviews of ICW shows that he attended. And he would cover the train wreck of a show they often were from beginning to end. The one that sticks out, two that stick out the most for me was two of the wrestlers are working out high spots in view of all the fans in the lobby when they started to let people in one night. The other was the merchandise table. They had surprise packages for like $10, and I wish I had it in front of me. He says, my friend bought one of these surprise packages, and boy was he surprised. In it was some old tatter photos of like wrestlers who nobody knew who was not with the promotion. A few other strange items, and a picture of a telephone.
What?
Yeah, he said in that grab bag for the wrestling fan who bought it, there was a picture of a telephone.
All right.
As funny as he is, I thought, that he must have left out something, a telephone. And then when I talked to him on the phone, he said, no, it was a picture of a telephone inside the grab bag. Yeah, and I assume it didn't have like the number of the promoter on it that would make something interesting about being a picture of a telephone. But Norm Dooley I only met him once, and it was at the WFIA convention in Georgia. But like I said on the last episode, my friend Lloyd and I just cold called him one night, and that led to, we would call him, we talked for like sometimes up to 2 hours, just mostly about Memphis. And that's where I got my first Memphis tapes, both audio and video. And not only is there a call to find the Weasel's World of Wrestling, we want to find the Weasel. Where is Norm Dooley?
Yeah, if you're out there listening, and there's always a chance you are, please, please, please check in. You are one of my dream guests. You're at the top of the list. I would love to talk to you. So many people want to hear what you have to say. So many people, like Kurt, actually knew you and want to hear you on the show. So either way, if anyone out there has any copies of Weasel's World, please check in with the show. Of course, if you want to send anything into the show, we'll give the address at the end of the program as well. Kurt, I wanted to read a listener letter here I found interesting. It's from a listener named Ian Kai Briscoe.
Ah.
And I believe he actually is a distant relative of the Briscoes, believe it or not.
Oh, no way. Cool.
Hey, Brian, I've been going through the back catalog of the show, starting with episode 1 and trying to catch up. Anyways, I was listening to episode 35, The Chain Gang, which had an interview conversation with Richard Vychik about the Bruiser. In that interview, he mentioned some California wrestlers, one of them specifically, Don Manukian. My family was extremely close to Don and his family going back to the 40s. Him and my great-grandfather used to go to the wrestling matches in the 50s after serving a tour of Korea. They'd throw peanut shells in the ring during the matches and watch the wrestlers freak out. One night, a wrestler named Hardy Kruskamp caught him doing it and called him over after the show and tried unsuccessfully, but still painfully, to pull his shoulder blade out of place and teach him a lesson. It always stuck with him. He went on to play for the Oakland Raiders and the San Francisco 49ers in 1960, then 1962, respectively. After injuring his knee, he went to the matches again, healing up and paying closer attention. He met a man named Ray Stevens who was having a feud with Pepper Gomez in Sacramento, broadcast through KXTV Channel 40. He was on his way out of town and Don told him about Hardy and the peanut shells and the football, and Ray Stevens said, "I'm going to LA, you meet me down there, I'll get you something." So he did. He worked preliminaries against a younger Adnan El Casey than Billy White Wolf. Oh, excuse me, that's what his name was back then, Billy White Wolf.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Two different people. Eventually, he developed a California following, especially in Sacramento, Modesto, and Bakersfield. Los Angeles was partial as well. Eventually, he met Dick Beyer, and they tagged for the better part of 4 years together, with the occasional reuniting. He was a great guy who sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was a great worker by all accounts, and as rugged as it got in real life. Heard that episode and popped big. Wanted to share a little bit about him. So thank you, Ian, for sharing your anecdote about Don Manukian, your family's actually experience with Don Manukian. Really cool.
Which wrestler was it tried to take the person's shoulder out?
Hardy Kruskamp.
Oh, wow. I gotta say, I don't know where other people fall in with this, but I'm often unimpressed when I hear about a wrestler doing something to a fan like that, because when I hear the actual situations, usually it's a fan who probably cannot defend themselves, is not a natural wrestler. I hear of some exceptions, but and not so much anymore, but back in the kayfabe days, indie guys as they're coming up, they were saying, I can hardly wait for somebody to tell me wrestling's fake. And I'm saying, yeah, and usually there's somebody who doesn't know the first thing about fighting, and they don't know what an insult is if they're not into wrestling. Now, if somebody with cauliflower ears who looked like, looked like an MMA fighter said wrestling's fake, and the guy said, okay, let's go, prove it, I'd be fucking impressed.
I don't want to go too deep into this now because we're running a little late, and This is a much bigger topic. But I actually this past weekend was having a discussion with someone who I probably shouldn't name about this. And I was talking about the dichotomy that exists between Eddie Graham, the brilliant wrestling mind, and Eddie Graham, the sadistic guy. Because that's the only word for it. He took great joy in having fans, people who just, hey, I'd really love to be a wrestler. Like you. When you imagine when you, first got involved in wrestling, Kurt, took people like that, had them come down to the snake pit, had Bob Roop as his enforcer, stretched the hell out of them until they were crying, until they were bleeding. And then once they were done and the guy was messed up, if he hadn't already somehow tried to escape, and more than likely, if he had, he may have been chased. I mean, Ron Fuller told the story on Austin Night Live a while back about Bob Roop literally chasing a guy down the street and then the police picking the guy up like bloody and naked and putting him in the police car and bringing him back to the sportatorium. And the guy flipped out because they brought him right back to where the attack happened. But Bob Roop would kick the crap out of these guys, and then Eddie Graham would go in there and go for the kill and just try to really maim and hurt people.
It's absolutely fucked up.
It's sadistic. I mean, that's the only word for it, is sadistic. And, that's one of those hard things to balance, is just Eddie Graham was someone, like, locally, to people who didn't know any better, he was respected. He was a civic leader. He had the Boys Ranch.
Absolutely.
And to wrestling people, he influenced every single wrestling mind from Bill Watts to Kevin Sullivan to Jerry Jarrett to everyone else, Dusty Rhodes. Everyone that worked with him learned so much and talks about how brilliant he was, how great he was with finishes. But he was also a really sick guy. And, you know, I guess it's a discussion for another day, a longer discussion.
Yeah. I think people want to think either you're a great person or a bad person. No, people are complex. They can be brilliant at one thing and a total douchebag in another area, you know? Yeah,
well, we can't end this on a sour note, Kurt. So before we move
Absolutely not.
Before we move on and we get to What If with Bix, and this is a great one. I think everyone will really love it. Kurt, before we go there, we need a Dr. Jerry Graham story of some sort.
Oh, this one is especially timely because people who know me know that I love to celebrate Day of the Dead. I adorn my cubicle with photos of people who are influenced me or who I knew and are no longer with us, as well as just some people, luchadores, that just look trippy enough to put on a Halloween setup. And so this is the perfect time to bring up one of my closest friends from high school, Philip Walsh. His father was one of these self-made men. This was back I met him in the late 70s. We're still close friends today. But his father was one of these self-made men who, you know, literally worked from the time he was 9 years old and built his own, I think it was a construction company or something like that. But he passed away 10 years ago, I think 1 or 2 months back. But one of my fondest memories is, I mean, he was a typical dad of that day. You know, that was back in the day when, you know, you could be listening to Led Zeppelin and people, you know, that the father would say, "Oh, is that the Beatles you're listening to?" You know, or, well, my dad actually enjoyed hearing Queen, but he'd never get it right. He says, "Oh, yeah, Kurt listens to this really talented group called the Queens." And he generally loved their music, but a lot of parents were like that. They half heard what their kids were into and didn't really pay attention. Well, when I met Dr. Jerry Graham and I started telling all my non-wrestling friends about him, he became a cult hero with all of them. They would practice the war cry and mimic the incestuous sins he decries. And you know, we figured nobody around us, you know, that was over 30 paid any attention. Well, Phil's father, he looked kind of like a thinner version of Mr. Banks from Mary Poppins, you know, played by David Tomlinson. And really good guy, very dry wit. But one day I'm over at Phil's house, and I'm sitting in his father's easy chair, very nice chair, which was not a problem if his dad wasn't around. I didn't realize the father was at home. And I'm sitting there, and Phil's looking at me, says, "Kurt, look to your right. Somebody's staring at you." And there is Mr. Walsh with his hands on his hips. He's staring at me through his spectacles and says, "Young man, do you know whose chair you're sitting in?" And I'm about to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh." He says, "No, wait a minute. Says, "This chair is reserved for the elite, for people with great, you know, who have had great intellectual achievements. You know, not just anybody sits in this chair." And he shook his head and says, "Young man, who do you think you are, Dr. Jerry Graham?"
No way. Come on.
He did. I not only got out of his chair, I bowed. And, you know, to this day, both Philip and I treasure that tale of his dad. Everybody misses him. He was a grand old guy.
Well, that's a good note to move on to What If? We're bringing back one of the most popular segments in show history, What If, where David Bixenspan and myself go through the listeners' questions about what if scenarios. What if this person didn't die? What if this person went here? What if this person did that? It's always fun, and Bix and I had a blast doing this. We're going to do more soon. If you have a what if you want to submit to the show, there's an ongoing thread at facebook.com/superpodcast. Feel free to chime in, and we will hopefully...
I see one of the questions right here, actually, that was emailed to you.
Yeah. Oh, really? What is that?
Yeah, it's... What if that guy really took all the photos he claims he took?
Wait, you're talking about Lil Al or Lil Mike?
Either or. That's the best part of it.
Man, Leno has been called out so many times for claiming photos that are so ridiculous that he claimed. My favorite still, look, I know someone who has the Hogan Andre one that he pretended was his, and I think that's funny. My favorite still is the one of Dory Funk Sr. and Dory Funk Jr. on the ranch when Dory Jr. was a child, and it says photo by Real Leno at AOL.com. Come on.
I picture an embryo roaming the ranch with a camera in his hand.
I've never been to the Olympic. He wasn't shooting ringside since 1966. Come on, he's not that old.
I can't remember where, but somewhere, that famous photo of Stu Hart when he was really young and this total stud, doing that pose sitting down. I can't remember where it is, but somewhere I saw the photo credited to him.
When Lord Littlebrook died, I saw the photo that I think was actually legitimately maybe a Lil Al photo, and it all of a sudden had Leno right across the middle of it. Oh. I may have to go to Cauliflower Alley just so I could say, sit down, Mike.
Okay, that's the next goal. We get Brian last to Cauliflower Alley. We have to get him to Las Vegas. Think of this, Brian. This could be the next big thing. You come to Cauliflower Alley. It could be like a reality series. You're the guy who hates Vegas, but we all drag you along, and laughs abound, man. I mean, and like I said, man, I'll bring the greens and the edibles.
Is weed legal?
Sativa.
Is weed legal in Nevada?
I think it just became legal there.
All right. Well, then I'll never go to any. I'll be in my room with Howard Baum the whole time. I won't even be down at the stupid convention.
I'd be there too. It'd be like Night at the Opera, and we'll all shove ourselves into the hotel room and just get totally baked.
It'll be me, Kurt Brown, Howard Baum, and Don Morocco, otherwise known as Corky Dan.
Yes!
Having a good time. Roach clips abound. But listen, with that, let's move on now to this segment making its big return, What If? With David Bixenspan and myself. It's time for the return of one of the most popular segments in show history, What If? Where we look at scenarios, what if? What could have happened if other things hadn't happened? Or had happened. You never know. And of course, for this segment, I am joined this week by our old friend, co-creator of the Super Podcast, none other than Deadspin Denim David Bixenspan. Bix, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. You don't have to exaggerate the popularity of the segment on my account, though.
And by the way, we're going to have you on again soon. I definitely want to talk about some of the recent stuff you've done in Deadspin. The Lee Harvey Oswald article was excellent, and you've just written a bunch of excellent pieces all year long.
Thank you.
So great job you've been doing.
Hopefully more along those lines coming soon.
Well, let's get going with the what ifs. We got a bunch here from listeners, a lot of interesting ones. And the first one here is from Seth Hansen. What if Paul Heyman went to the WWF in 1993 to be a manager instead of going to ECW? Tommy Dreamer had mentioned this on the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD, that Paul was going to go to the WWF. What do you think? Early 93. Now, you and I are pretty familiar, I would think, with Paul's career at that time because he was on John Arezzi's show all the time, and he was very open about what he was working on. You know, he was working on that HD project, the World Wrestling Network, where they filmed the demo in Texas. That was the one where they had, was it the Kimono Dragons, Ted Petty and Dean Malenko under masks?
Yes, there's the Komodo Dragons.
The Komodo Dragons, excuse me.
Not the Kimono Dragons, no.
But then he was working with Jim Crockett, and of course Eddie brings him in to the first ECW television taping in early 93. And what do you think of the idea he had left WCW at the end of 92, that he would have possibly been considered to go to the WWF at that time?
I would guess not, because he's suing WCW. Like, I don't know if it necessarily works for him to go to a major office at that point, does it?
You know, and that's an interesting point, because hasn't Missy Hyatt said that one of the reasons the WWF, who originally she claimed, and I'm not saying this isn't true, I'm just saying I don't know it, I've heard her say it, they wanted her for WrestleMania 10 to be like Marilyn Monroe and wish happy birthday to WrestleMania, that one of the reasons they stayed away from her was the lawsuit with WCW?
I don't know if I've ever heard that, but it makes sense. And there's also the story of how Tom Zank got fired from WCW because he was on Missy Hyatt's witness list.
Oh, that's right. I mean, and actually, what was it? Was it Mick Foley and Max Payne were interviewed on like Inside Edition or something about it, weren't they?
Yes.
And they got in trouble for it.
I don't know if I knew about that part, but that makes sense in light of everything else.
I could be wrong, and I just very well might be. But Mick at that point, I don't think gave a shit because he was getting ready to leave.
Yeah.
But Max Payne, I think, may have either lost his job or gotten in a bunch of trouble for doing that.
Well, Max Payne just disappears.
Yeah. I started thinking about him the other day because he just kind of appeared in 93 out of nowhere. And he had, I know he has the New Japan training and everything, but he looked really shitty. And then by that point in 94, he finally kind of had something going on. He was with Mick Foley. They were having those brawls with the Nasty Boys. And then he's just gone until he appears again as Man Mountain Rock in WWF. And that's a very short and unremarkable run there.
Yeah, he's not on TV at all after Spring Stampede. And then he shows up looking like he had gained a lot of weight in the last 4 weeks at Slamboree and hits the guitar shot on Sags? I think it's Sags, right? That he hits the guitar with the guitar.
I think so. That's the Slamboree in Philadelphia.
Yes. But I just remember him walking out and he looks like a different person.
And again, that's right around the time of Missy's lawsuit.
And that's his last appearance, I believe. Yeah.
So we'll look into that and see if we can get an answer. But back to Heyman. What do you know, if anything, about Heyman's relationship with The Office before that? Obviously, he had been a teenage photographer at Madison Square Garden, and I'm sure Vince Jr. and the other people who were around then knew who he was. I mean, Paul makes himself known. But was he in communication with The Office at any other time? I mean, he left WCW the first time in 1989.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think if he ever talks about any dealings with Vince really after his youth until he's running ECW. I mean, just like anecdotally from stuff I've heard him talk about, I can't think of anything. And by the way, as far as like the stuff he was doing, this is just apropos of nothing. It made me think of it because it was on my mind. I got one of the magazines he edited a week or so back at the Beyond Wrestling show at Matt Tremont's Gimmick Table. It was an issue of Double Action Wrestling edited by Paul Heyman. I think it was dated early 87. So, with Wrestling Magazine dating, could be late 86, could be early 7. Yeah. So I don't know if this is while he's in Florida or right before. But yeah, he was still doing the Wrestling Magazine thing that late at least. So, I mean, that's, you know what though? That's something he could have done then too if he really wanted to. He's probably friends with everyone who runs a wrestling magazine. If he really wanted to, he probably could have been editing a magazine with someone. You know what? They probably would have brought him in for the Rule Breakers magazine they just started, which included roving heel reporter Joey Styles.
It would have been funny if that's what WWF was talking to him about. We don't want you to manage.
Magazine.
We'll run our magazine. Because they've offered that magazine to everybody. George Napolitano was offered it. Bill Apter was offered it.
Dave Meltzer.
Was Dave Meltzer offered the magazine?
Informally, it was... Who made the offer? I'm trying to remember. I know he said who it was. I can't remember if it's Harry Garvin
I do know the story. Was that Louis Dondero?
It was Louis Dondero.
Yeah.
Louis Dondero kind of offered him, not offered, but if we were to make you an offer, would you be interested? And Dave said no.
Smart.
Keep in mind, this is also, I believe it was 87, right? So this would be pretty much right when Dave made this decision to go full time with the Observer.
Yeah. And then with Heyman in 93, the other thing, and I know you've heard this, and I think you're going to have the exact same thought about this as I do.
Oh, his Hot 97 deal?
Yeah, his claim that he was going to be going up against Howard Stern in New York City. I'm going to say this for the record. I think that's 100% bullshit. 100%.
Who is it that he was saying was representing him? William Morris?
Yeah, probably. That wasn't going to happen. I don't care what the hell he says. I don't buy that for a moment. Not one moment.
I just think given how friendly he was with the newsletters and stuff, we would have heard something about that.
Well, not only how much he leaked to the newsletters, which of course, when we did Yama, I witnessed that firsthand when we decided not to use him. And he leaked to the Observer that, Paul Heyman has chosen not to go with Bob Meyrowitz's Yama pit fighting. It's like, really? That's what happened? That wasn't what happened on the call. So he leaked stuff. And again, what was he leaking to the newsletters at that time? It was all about the WWN, the thing he's trying to get off the ground. And then Eddie brings him into ECW, and he's aligned with Jim Crockett, and that lasts a good year and a half. So I don't know. I mean, and then I guess what if he went there as a manager? How would he have been used? in 93 at that time?
My guess is he would get the role that Scott Levy got as Johnny Polo. I mean, he wouldn't necessarily be Johnny Polo, but I'm guessing that's the slot he's in.
Well, here's the
Think about it, too. Rich kid gimmick.
Rich kid gimmick. Let's just say he goes there.
Jewish rich kid.
Yeah, stereotyping here. Let's just say he goes up there, right? Same time. And let's say he keeps, even if he has to change his name because they change everyone's name, he keeps the Paulie Dangerously persona. What about you put him with Shawn Michaels? And then you have Shawn with this loudmouth manager and Diesel. It would have been a heat machine.
I don't see them working well together. Both chemistry-wise and otherwise.
What about the idea that he wouldn't have gone to ECW? That's one of the things no one will ever know. What would have happened to ECW after Eddie if Heyman wasn't there?
It probably just sticks around for a while as an indie. Whether or not they keep TV, I think, is a question mark.
Do you think it kind of reverts back to ECW before Eddie? Just like kind of running, in a local bar, running small shows with the same crew of wrestlers who had been around since Joel Goodhart?
I don't know. I think it all comes down to whether or not Todd was going to keep TV, because that was clearly why both Eddie and Paul were interested in it.
Right.
Because that's what makes it different from the previous Philadelphia Indies. That's why you're actually going to have a booker of any renown coming in.
Hopefully we somewhat answered your question, Seth.
Yeah, that was fairly circular for what it was.
Yeah, it is in the nature of what if, because we have no idea what we're saying or what would have happened. But Bix, this next one may be right down your alley. It may not be. We never know.
Mm-hmm.
It's from Michael Cole, not that one. What if Jerry Lawler went to WCW with Lance Russell?
Is he going full? No, he's an owner, though. So are we assuming this is like, are we adjusting this to be in line with the plans in 91 for them to do an interpromotional thing?
Well, that's one of the things, and let's talk for a second about that. The plans were in place in 1991 for an interpromotional. It was going to be, Lawler versus Luger, right?
Well, I believe the idea was that they were going to do an NWA World Heavyweight title tournament in Memphis. Lawler would win, and then he would do his whole world champion versus company champion shtick, and that would end up with him unifying with Luger, and Luger would beat him to reunify the titles.
Whose idea was that? Whose concept?
I don't know, because Jerry Jarrett was not working with WCW at the time.
It would have, one of the only scenarios, and again, this could probably be proven, and I could be proven wrong easily, but I'm wondering if because Barnett had Jim Herd's ear, and Barnett was always a booster of Jerry Jarrett, he tried to bring him to Australia, put him in Atlanta. I wonder if that may have been the linchpin right there, is Barnett linking up Jim Herd with Jerry Jarrett, and they come up with this idea.
He was fairly high on Lawler, too, wasn't he?
Barnett?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. I mean, he really trusted Jerry Jarrett's instincts. Early on, he was one of the first guys to really trust Jerry Jarrett's instincts and see what he could do and how smart he was. Just the long-term planning and the short-term planning, how good it was. So Jim Barnett was always a booster of his.
Yeah, first outside promoter to hire him as a booker.
And by the way, we don't know exactly what would have happened, but we know what ended this. And that was Eddie Gilbert and Paul Heyman, going back to the first what if here.
Well, we know the public story is that Paul gets suspended for saying, for allegedly telling Eddie, or is it that Eddie leaked it to Paul and then Paul told the newsletters? Something like that.
Because Eddie was gone already. And Paul
but Eddie's in the office, and was he booking USWA at that point?
Well,
no.
Emery was booking. Emery was. Forgive me, because I was saying Paul was still in WCW. Eddie wasn't.
Yes, Eddie's in Eddie is in USWA, but on the verge of getting fired himself. If this is summer '91,
and then they went on the radio and talked about it, didn't they?
Eddie did. Well, no. Eddie went on Pro Wrestling Spotlight. I think that episode is on the Torch site. And Paul did a press conference at the China Club, which I believe is also on an episode of Pro Wrestling Spotlight that's on the Torch site.
A press conference at the China Club. I'd like to know what press attended that.
Well, I can think of one that wouldn't have made the trip because he's in California.
Yeah, Eddie Goldman. And
Eddie Goldman, George Napolitano,
Captain Lenny. Who would have attended the Paul Heyman press conference in 1991 at the China Club?
I can't remember. Did I tell you that I finally met Eddie Goldman earlier this year?
No, Eddie's the nicest guy in the world.
He is. I was at
and he's blind as a bat.
I was at the Deadspin event for Hamilton Nolan's book release, and because it was a boxing book, Eddie Goldman was among the invited guests. And Tim Marchman and Tomas Rios were both way too excited about introducing me to Eddie Goldman.
I like Eddie. I spent a lot of time around Eddie for Yama. Again, back to Yama. And in fact, after the Yama fight for a little while, me, Eddie, and the two ring girls were having drinks together. It was a good time. And then Eddie had to leave, or we got rid of Eddie. I forget exactly what happened, but the night continued without Eddie Goldman is the point. But yeah, I mean, the point is Eddie Gilbert. I said Eddie Gilbert or Eddie Goldman. I don't even remember because there's so many Eddies in this story.
Gilbert.
I said Eddie Gilbert. Yeah, Eddie Goldman, I meant to say. But with Eddie Gilbert, again, I know they went on John Arezzi's show. I think they may have gone on Joel Goodhart's show, maybe even that same weekend, and done the exact same thing and just, exposed that this is what was going to happen.
Well, no, it wasn't they exposed that it was happening. This was dealing with the fallout from Paul getting suspended.
How many times was Heyman fired or suspended? 89, 91, and then I guess the final one was 92. And did he threaten to sue or sue after each one?
I don't know if he did in 89. The other two, yes.
So there's the end. I mean, and then I guess the other thing is just going back to it. If Jerry Lawler goes with Lance in 89, again, like you said, he's an owner of the company. He would have to sell his percentage back to Jerry Jarrett or find someone else. And I don't know how he would have survived in WCW. It wasn't the WWF, which was a good landing space for him just because there wasn't chaos. There was one boss, and that's the one guy you answer to. In WCW, he probably would have gotten frustrated like everyone else at the revolving door of suits that didn't know what they were doing, at bookers who didn't know what they were doing, because Lawler did know what he was doing as a booker. Even if he was silly at times, he knew how to get results.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he would have been able to take it.
I don't think so. No.
And how would Memphis have survived at that time in 89 without Lawler?
Oh, with Lance and Lawler? No, forget it.
Yeah, it would have been pretty bad. So, all right, well, there's that one. Let's see. Next one right here is from Steve Campbell. I'm a huge fan of Sergeant Slaughter. So what if Sarge hadn't left the WWF in his prime? Does he eventually have to go heel to get a run at Hogan? WrestleMania 3 maybe, if Andre was unable to get to the ring by that point? What do you think, Bix?
That's an interesting one. I mean, that's one you can actually kind of draw a direct line through because it's not unrealistic that he somehow it's unrealistic in the climate of the 1984 WWF that he resolves all the licensing stuff, considering the way they were strong-arming everyone. But you can actually kind of try to draw a map. So he was still so recent as a face, but I can actually see him turning heel relatively quickly after when he actually ended up leaving. Because they really didn't have anything for him because they blow off the Sheik feud. And then it's just him and, who was it usually? Him and JYD, I think?
As tag team, yeah.
Yeah, against Sheik and Volkov.
I've always thought that was the natural move because Slaughter was an amazing heel. And the timing was perfect in early 84 to turn him face.
Yes.
To turn him face with the Iron Sheik. And that thing was huge. People, I brought this up before, but in 1984, Hulk Hogan really didn't work a program. He was just a touring attraction. The two programs that did really good at the house shows were Piper and Snuka and Slaughter and the Iron Sheik. And you talk to some people from back then, they'll tell you at that time, Slaughter was as popular in some places as even Hogan.
Well, you forgot one other drawing program too, which was Tito Santana, Greg Valentine.
Was that the main event on that run?
It was the main event in some places. I know it drew very big in Detroit.
Okay.
For one.
So I left that one off the list. But Slaughter was such a good heel, and his babyface run, there's no way it could have kept up. Because that sort of rampant patriotism can only last so long. Everyone loves their country, but no one wants to scream about it nonstop for 2 years straight. So I think you go into early 85, Slaughter doesn't leave. They find someone else for him to work with. You get through WrestleMania, Slaughter versus Volkov, Slaughter versus someone, right? Yeah. And then I always thought that was the main event for WrestleMania 2, Hogan versus Slaughter. You have him turn on Hogan. He doesn't have to become an Iraqi sympathizer or, burn the flag or anything.
Well, because he had already been a heel.
Right. And the whole idea is here's Hogan, Mr., American made. He's wearing that on his shirt years before the WCW theme song. Mr. America waving the flag on Saturday night's main event. Slaughter turns on him. I mean, it's natural. I'm about America. I served our country. Where was Hogan? Playing bass on the beach. And you lead into WrestleMania 2, and that could be, and first of all, Slaughter could still work. He hadn't gained all the weight yet, and he was still a bumping machine when necessary. So I think they would have had a hot bunch of matches, and I think it would have been really good, and I think it would have been better than Hogan versus Bundy at being a heat-seeking main event.
Yes, I would agree with that. And also, Slaughter was a big guy. Even when he was in shape, he was tall.
Right.
Yeah, he was a tall, robust guy. So he would match up with Hogan well even then. And I mean, what do you think of the weight gain with him? Do you think that was just complacency once he had G.I. Joe in place?
Yeah, I hate to accuse someone of something like that, but he got G.I. Joe in place, and then he got Vern. And Vern, he wasn't going to go all out for Vern. And I think he gained a ton of weight. Go watch the video when he first came back in 91. That video where he's on the back of the Jeep, and it kind of pulls up, and you see him there. He's huge. He'd never been that fat before.
And he could still work, though.
He could still bump. He was always able to take great bumps.
Yes, and for people who are disappointed, by the way, with the Hogan stuff, and the WrestleMania match is good, but it's not anything special, watch their match from the Garden. That's the actual singles blow-off to that feud.
Yeah, no, that's the best match.
They could go with the tag, but their Desert Storm match, how very tasteful, is definitely one of the better Hogan WWF matches. If someone wanted to say it was the best, I wouldn't even argue with them.
It's up there. It's certainly much better than the Mania. I mean, to me, the Mania match, one of the things that killed it for me as an 11-year-old watching it was the outcome was completely obvious before it. There was no way Hogan wasn't winning back that title. No way. I knew it.
Yeah, and one thing that's great about Desert Storm match, too, is Hogan in fatigues with the gas mask and stuff is the most badass Hogan has ever looked.
Well,
no, but coming in there and immediately throwing powder and throwing fireballs, you know what I mean? It recontextualizes all the annoying Hogan cheating and stuff into a positive way.
It's definitely like a Hogan you want more of at that time, where he was getting more and more cartoonish and more kids driven. It's more of like that Hogan you want, where he's actually an ass kicker.
Yeah, as a friend of mine put it once, it was something like, this is what there should have been more of this Hogan, where he comes out in camouflage throwing fireballs at those who dare disgrace America.
Yeah, exactly. Although I don't know, considering his track record with fireballs, it may have been smart to not go to that well too often.
No, but I think he did it okay in that match. But
go watch the Warrior match.
Oh, the Warrior. No, the best part is not Hogan having trouble lighting the fireball. It's Warrior selling nothing.
Yeah, well, that's good. I also like that Hogan's the first guy to have a self-inflicted fireball. He throws it at himself. I'm laughing just thinking about it. Bix, on this topic, looking at what could have been with WWF, merchandising-wise, and money from just shows and everything, and of course pay-per-views come in, pretty shortly after this, versus going to the AWA and having the G.I. Joe deal. Do you think Slaughter was better off doing what he did, or for the long term, should he have stayed with the WWF?
I think he made the right decision because, first of all, it all worked out well in the end. He gets the WWF run and an office job. And in the meantime, he was making very good indie money. I want to say he was making either $1,500 or $2,500 a shot. And this is in the mid-'80s. Yeah. So what? That's probably, at least $3,000 today, if even on the low end?
At least.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, with inflation.
So he's having a good lifestyle. He's probably just working once or twice a week. He's got the G.I. Joe stuff, too. He probably saved a lot of mileage on his body.
I think that's why he ate. He didn't have to worry for a while. He was making, I don't know how much money he was making with the G.I. Joe. I don't know what his deal was. He was on the cartoon. He also had an action figure. Was he getting a royalty per figure? Because no one else was, because all those characters are made up. I mean, the Refrigerator Perry figure was like a mail-in. It wasn't sold in stores. Slaughter was. There was a mail-in Slaughter, too, but Slaughter was sold in stores. There was Slaughter's Marauders. Was he getting a cut of every single thing that had Slaughter on it?
I would hope so.
And was he getting royalties for like the G.I. Joe movie? I mean, these are questions I don't know, and we're not going to have an answer to them. But in terms of if he would have been better off in WWF or there, that's a big part of it. Of course, he owns his name, and he comes back eventually in 91. And that's the other thing too. Should Vince have waited as long to bring him back in your eyes?
Well, was he trying to go back? Because you got to remember, the story when he came back was he had realized his time was pretty much up as a full-time wrestler, so he wanted to have one last run and then get an office job, which is what he got.
That's exactly what he got. Well, good question there, Steve. Good what if. Our next one here, Bix, is another one that may be right down your alley. It's a two-parter from Nick Massey. Not that one.
We're having that a lot this time.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Our next question is from Jim Barnett. Nick Massey says, part one, what if Barry Windham stayed in the WWF in 1985?
Well, first of all, Real American does not get repurposed.
Right. Well, did it get repurposed before? It was after Windham.
They used it once at Windham's last taping.
Right, I've seen that. But how long before Hogan went to it?
That's a good question, because that's 85. I think he still uses the cartoon theme into early 86, right?
Maybe.
But he has Real American by WrestleMania too, though.
Yeah.
So it took a few months.
Like. What was that? It was like, I'd rather have that song than the theme to my cartoon show.
Well, I also wonder, it wasn't a single. I wonder when they found out that the cartoon theme was getting repurposed for that Bonnie Tyler album.
That's right. That may be why Hogan didn't want to do it.
No, seriously. Like, I did a comparison of this once. It's probably still on my personal SoundCloud. It's the same recording.
All those Bonnie Tyler songs, you go back and listen to them, they're interesting because they're all written from Meatloaf.
Yeah.
Those were all going to be like the next Meatloaf album with Jim Steinman, and then they had a falling out.
Have you seen those recent Meatloaf clips, by the way?
I just saw, we'll get back to wrestling in a second. I was just watching before last week's episode of Last Week Tonight.
Yes,
John
exactly.
Oliver, and oh my God. I mean, it was frightening, but it was also one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Suzanne walked in the room because I was losing it, watching him next to Mitt Romney, like bent over, trying to sing, and his voice sounds awful.
Yeah, it was one thing when he was doing the stylized national anthem. But then when they showed him trying to sing I Would Do Anything for Love.
Yeah, that was brutal. But anyway, back to
Meatloaf, who then also is in the video for Land of a Thousand Dances from the wrestling album.
He's the drummer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Also, I don't know how many of them are on the album, but at least on JYD's appearance on American Bandstand has a surprisingly good backup band. Or at least, miming everything, because it's Rick Derringer, Carmine Appice, and it was someone else that was a legitimate musician of some renown, but I forget who.
It's easy to forget before Jim Johnston or whatever his name is. They were working with actual rock stars and musicians on these songs.
Yes. But anyway, what were we? Oh, Barry Windham.
Windham stays in the WWF in 85. And, you and I have talked way back on the Super Podcast.
Oh, Dan Spivey.
Well, not even that, just the idea that it's easy to forget just how over Windham and Rotunda really were. They really were super over for a while there.
Yes, watch both of their tag title wins.
Yeah, the place goes nuts.
I would honestly say the second one where they beat Cheek and Volkov
on TV. That's not a house show. That's a TV match.
Is probably the biggest pop I've ever seen at a WWF TV taping from that era.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that context. You might be right, though.
Like, they go nuts.
They go crazy.
And they can work. Like, I would love to see one day, if it exists in the WWE archives, the whole title win over Adonis and Murdoch, because what aired on TV and got released on a home video looks like one of the best WWF matches of the 80s, too.
It does. I always assumed that that whole match didn't exist.
Well, they didn't shoot it, like, with professional lighting or anything. I've always wondered if it was just that.
Yeah, that could be it. That could be, because it was really dark. I mean, it was a handheld at ringside for a regular house show, no lights on.
Although that adds to it in that they had experimented sometimes where they would all of a sudden just light the place up and everyone would know it was about to be a title change.
Right, well, that happened in Boston, right?
Right, with Santana and Morocco.
Yeah. All of a sudden they put all the lights on to get the cameras out. Everyone's like, oh, gee, I wonder what's about to happen.
Yeah.
If Wyndham had stayed, I guess the point is Wyndham wouldn't have stayed. Wyndham was a Rolling Stone. He was just like
But
his
you know
dad.
what, though? Here's the thing. If he knows he has no shot at getting back into Crockett for a year, does he leave?
Did he know that, though?
That's what I'm saying. If he knew, would he leave?
I just talked to Jim Cornette
Or did
about
he
this,
know?
actually, on the drive-thru. That 1986, that year of purgatory, where Wyndham's in Florida, and Florida's not the greatest at that time, and Dusty doesn't touch him. Dusty's still upset that he walked out on him in 84, and Watts doesn't touch him. And the story, the rumor, who knows what, was that potentially Watts had an issue with Blackjack and an issue about reliability, and because of that, stayed away from Wyndham.
And it should be mentioned, too, he was absolutely right to leave Crockett when he did, because even if Dusty turned things around, business was terrible.
In
He left.
84 was awful. 84 was
when
awful.
he left, he was not making any money. So I don't blame him for leaving one bit. And I guess Dusty held it personal, even though he got Magnum and gave Magnum that push. But what happens if he doesn't leave? I think he keeps a good spot because he's this big guy who can move and work, and
eventually
clearly
turn
Vince
heel.
liked him. Yeah.
Eventually
Clearly.
turn heel, put him with Heenan, and there you go.
Now, what happens to Dan Spivey if he can't just show up and they pretend he's been there all along?
That's a great question. I just told Kevin Sullivan the other day that it was a mistake to have Spivey in the varsity club. I'm not a Dan Spivey guy. Even in Japan, I'm not a Dan Spivey guy.
Well, nobody knew, I guess because it had been so long ago, no one knew he had actually played for Vince Dooley.
No. And he just didn't, to me, like, look-wise, he didn't fit the varsity club. Rotunda was a perfect fit. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to him. Steiner, a perfect fit. Dr. Death makes sense. Ron Simmons makes perfect sense.
Although that didn't last long.
Right, but Spivey? Come on. It wasn't a fit. Look-wise, personality-wise, work rate-wise, in no way should he have been a member of the varsity club.
No. He had become a good worker, even if he was kind of awkward. Like, I really like his match with Sting in All Japan in 89, and the Luger match from, is that 90 or 91?
90, I think. I think it's the end of 90, isn't it?
No, the pay-per-view match. Oh, was it Wrestle War 91?
Oh, maybe.
Yes, I think so.
Oh, I'm completely wrong then. I was thinking of Clash of Champions, so I'm 100% wrong on that.
Like, he was good. He could have like really fun heavyweight matches with other big guys like that, who I guess guys who could bring the movement given the status of his knees. But
I don't know, not for
me. He was very inconsistent. Like, no, I hate his matches with him as Hansen's partner.
Yeah,
in All Japan.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of his All Japan stuff at all. On this topic though, Bix, the what if Barry Windham had stayed in 85? I guess because we know how great his run from 87 to early 89 was in Crockett and, later, I guess, at just WCW. You don't think about it as much, but I think more about what if he hadn't left in 89? Because he was big, he was bulked up.
He was arguably the best wrestler in the world.
Arguably the best wrestler in the world. He was tall. He actually had a good look as the Widowmaker. How would that have changed 1990? Where they make the change to the Warrior, and then the Warrior has no opponents. They put Hogan with Earthquake, and they recycle Rick Rude. And Rick Rude's great. We're all fans of Rick Rude, but it wasn't the right time. He had just destroyed Rick Rude the summer before. But what if you had Windham in there? I mean, it may not have been the perfect thing for Warrior, because you have one of the greatest workers of all time, and one of the guys who really couldn't work at all. But maybe Windham and Hogan.
Maybe. Well, you know what, though? You put Windham with Hogan, then you can give Earthquake to Warrior.
And it makes sense, actually, because Earthquake debuted with that push-up challenge with Dino Bravo, with the Warrior and Dino Bravo, coming out of the crowd and attacking the Ultimate Warrior, a sneak attack. They thought he was just a guy named John.
I'm trying to remember, too. Do him and Warrior work a program at all, or is it all Warrior and Bravo?
I don't remember Warrior working with Earthquake, because they were just building Earthquake at that time, and Bravo was going to be able to do jobs the Warrior. Earthquake couldn't.
Yeah. And Earthquake drew money with Hogan, and you can't do the exact same angle with Warrior that you did with Hogan. And you wouldn't even necessarily want to, but I think that works out a lot better for him just to at least have Earthquake, even if he doesn't have Windham. Just keep Hogan occupied.
Yeah.
And he gets someone fresh.
You don't think it would have changed any of the other timelines? Like, do you think Hogan's still working that program at the beginning of 90 with Perfect? Or would Windham have slid in there?
They had been building him for a while, though.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be in a Survivor Series. Which team was he going to be on? It was
he was going to be on Macho King Randy Savage's King's Court.
That's right.
Where he was replaced. Was it by Earthquake?
Yeah, I think it may have been. Because Bravo was on that team, wasn't
today.
he?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that's the first part. What about Barry Windham? Here's the second one, Bix. What if Ricky Steamboat had stayed in Jim Crockett Promotions in 1985? I'll answer this. He would have been incredibly frustrated at Dusty, even more than he was when he quit to go to the WWE.
Yeah. It's hard to even think of a scenario where he lasts long with all of his issues with Dusty and with George Scott being in the WWF.
I mean, it's just Dusty took over the book in 84, and Dusty was going to make himself the centerpiece of every babyface angle, every babyface program. And Steamboat saw the writing on the wall.
Well, he retired first.
He retired in 84. They brought him back. He had the Tully match at Starrcade. And then shortly after that, he's gone. And again, I think it was the right decision. I don't know how he would have lasted. I mean, Dusty brought in Magnum. Dusty was teaming with Manny at the time. Like I said, I think Steamboat saw the writing on the wall. I don't know what his relationship backstage was like with Dusty, but he had been an institution in Mid-Atlantic, and knowing what we know about Dusty, especially at that time, Dusty may have saw him and said, this is competition. This guy's in my way to be as over as I can be, so I need to push him out.
Right. Dusty needed one of his guys to be in that spot, so that's why he was grooming Wyndham, and that's why he then put Magnum in that spot. They were his guys. He did not mind pushing them that hard.
It wasn't going to be Steamboat, though.
Right.
So there's your answer, Nick Massey. It wasn't going to be Steamboat no matter what. Bix, we have time for one more here this week. Let's get a good one here.
While you look, I'll add one thing to that. It wouldn't shock me if from Dusty's perspective, even though at that point he hadn't, completely let himself go, he probably also thought that having a muscle guy like Steamboat, and granted Steamboat got even bigger in the WWF, but he was very impressive looking back then, to have a guy that looked like that in the company when really no one else did, when Dusty's trying to get himself over, I could see him thinking that hurt him.
Yeah, I think so.
Who else is there in Crockett at that point that's really a body guy? I mean, yeah, okay, American Starship.
Yeah, but that doesn't count.
Right.
And why do you keep bringing up Spivey?
Because that's what we're doing.
Who was a body guy in Crockett at that time?
Later, yeah, but other than Steamboat that's pushed?
Someone's going to say someone that we're not thinking of, but I can't think of anybody. This is obviously before the Road Warriors. This is, yeah. That's an interesting point. Because who does Dusty align himself with at first, before Magnum? It's Manny Fernandez.
Mm-hmm.
Who's a fiery babyface, very underrated, actually, in terms of what he could do, but wasn't going to surpass Dusty. Dusty didn't have to worry about that. And he also wasn't going to make Dusty look as big and fat as he was.
Though Dusty still looked like the old Dusty in 84.
Well, things were about to change in the wrestling business. And with that, Bix, let's go to our final what if this week. It's from George Herbig II.
Herbig is one word as the last name?
Yes, Herbig.
Okay, you pronounced it as if her and big were two different words.
George Herbig II.
Herbig, you keep doing it.
How do you pronounce it? Let me hear you.
I would say Herbig.
George Herbig II.
That's better.
Okay. Sorry, George.
Sounded like you were making a joke about someone's mother.
Herbig. I was talking about Dusty again. Herbig. What if there wasn't an oil depression in the 80s when the UWF and WCCW were trying to take off to new heights? I find this interesting just because of the inclusion of world class in this discussion, because you never hear world class tied into the oil crisis the way, Bill Watts and Mid-South Wrestling was.
Right, but Dallas was part of the oil boom.
Certainly.
That's where the TV show comes from.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the TV show. And by the way, I must say this now. I'm not going to do it this week. We'll probably do it on the next installment of this. But the next question is from Bobby Ewing about what if the AWA had given Hulk Hogan the AWA title. So speaking of Dallas, Bobby Ewing has the next question.
No, not that one.
Not that one.
Not Nick Massey.
Not that one. Not Michael Cole. But let's talk about this one, Bix. What if there wasn't an oil depression? How would it affected UWF and WCCW? Let's take UWF briefly first. It certainly had a big effect. on things, and I've talked to Mike Mills, and I've talked to other people who lived in that area in Louisiana or in Texas around that time, and certainly say it affected things. But I've always believed that maybe there were bigger issues. No, I shouldn't say bigger, but there were other issues with the UWF that also had the effect. Getting Ken Mantell as the booker and taking all that crew from Dallas, who had already been on TV in many of those towns in Oklahoma and Louisiana on World Class. So no one's fresh. It's just taking these guys and putting them here. And also, they moved away from the formula of 1984 quicker than they should have. 1984, they had the big guys, and they mixed in as many young and good-looking wrestlers as possible. And they blew up that audience. The Rock and Roll Express, Terry Taylor, they had the Midnight Express, and you look at 85, right before the launch of the UWF, you have Al Perez and Wendell Cooley are your top babyface tag team. You have Bob Sweetan, you have Randy Coley as the Nightmare, you have Kareem Mohammed, you have Kamala. It's just all big guys. Nord the Barbarian with Jake, who was actually an underrated team for a little while there, and they blew the babyface turn for Jake. But
Lord Humongous, also in 85.
I
love, by the way, that you said humongous.
I do that all the time. It must be a New York thing for everyone but you.
I know, it's weird, isn't it?
Are there any other things you don't say that most New Yorkers do?
Let me think how I say orange.
Well, how do New Yorkers say it?
The way I don't know. Maybe not the way I just said it.
Orange? Orange? You're going to accuse me of insulting a woman again? Like George Herbig II? But back
I'd like to apologize to him, by the way.
Yeah, back to the question before we go completely off track, Bix. If there wasn't an oil depression for the UWF, how do you think it affects the UWF? And again, the other thing I guess we should say too is, and that's why tying WCCW into this is interesting, another big mistake I think was the UWF trying to go into Dallas and compete and run TV from Dallas for Power Pro Wrestling. Major mistake. TV looked bad just because there was no one there, even though the matches are great. And a waste of time. Opening an office in Dallas was a bad decision on top of probably a syndication network they couldn't sustain. But what are your thoughts, Bix?
I understand Watts' idea behind going into Dallas, though. It was not, let's expand and let's go to war with Fritz. It was, if I need to expand, what is the closest top 10 market to me?
Right. Problem is, he probably didn't need to expand.
Well, also, you know what? I mean, you're working with Houston, which is also a top 10 market.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, Dallas was bigger, but not that much bigger. Why didn't he just go through Houston?
And, that was really where you see Dallas get burned out. Was that summer of 86 after Kerry gets hurt, Gino dies, the crew goes with Ken Mantell to the UWF.
Chris Adams,
they drop the NWA affiliation and just make Rick Rude the heavyweight champion of the world.
But Chris Adams headbutts a airline pilot.
But Chris Adams,
was it airline pilot or flight attendant? I've heard both, and I'm never sure which actually happened.
I've always heard flight attendant, and I've always pictured a super kick. It just makes it a lot more fun if you picture that he super kicked the flight attendant in the middle of the flight. But all of that's going on. And there have also been, some of the tragedies. Dallas was burned out on wrestling. And all they did was add another promotion into the market with all the same guys you had just been watching for years.
Yeah, but I don't think that much changes for either of them without the oil crisis or bust or whatever you want to call it, because both had so many other issues because, World Class has the deaths and everything. Mid-South UWF has the divorce. Watts is probably tapping out anyway.
Well, when was the divorce between Bill Watts and Eni Watts?
It's already on its way to happening throughout 86, I believe. And then I believe it's January 87 or a little before is when he effectively turns over the reins of the company to Jim Ross. And with Eddie Gilbert as the booker.
Huh. Okay. And that's what the UWF is when the Crockett deal is made.
Yeah.
So if there isn't an oil depression, what happens to the UWF?
I don't think that much changes.
Maybe not as quick.
Well, also, what it does change is that he's probably able to rely on those core towns a little more.
Right. I mean, because that's something every wrestling promoter went through, where you have something really hot and then things thin out and you have your base audience so you could still get things going and hopefully heat something up and bring people back. The problem is the base audience went down.
Right, and there's, of course, also the argument that the sports teams in overlapping markets with Mid-South were doing okay.
I've heard that too. I talked to Mike Mills about that too, actually. That the New Orleans Saints, what was 87 their big year where all of a sudden they did great?
Maybe. So is it because you're looking at a different demographic and, in terms of income? Maybe. Like maybe it's not one is true and one is false.
And then in terms of world class, I think there were so many catastrophic mistakes made at the beginning of 86, followed by Kerry's accident, followed by replacing that crew with some good workers, some really bad workers, but nothing, again, you went away from the formula that worked. The formula that Bill Dundee brought to Mid-South in 84 really worked, and they went away from it in 85. And then with World Class, the formula from late 82 until 85 was still working. And instead of having good-looking heels and baby faces coming in, they went to Matt Bourne, they went to Buzz Sawyer. All of a sudden, Blackjack Mulligan's back, Bruiser Brody's back. So it was changing, again, from the good-looking guys, the young guys, something that feels fresh and new, to the big lumbering guys or the ugly guys again.
You don't think Jeep Swenson was good-looking?
No.
Okay.
No.
I know some YouTube commenters who would disagree with you.
I'm sure you think he looks like a badass because he's very similar to Hogan in the Desert Storm death match. He's wearing the military fatigues. I think he had a beret. Did Jeep Swenson have a beret?
Yes. Mr. Jeep Swenson did have a beret.
Mr. Jeep Swenson. You have a lot of respect for Mr. Jeep Swenson, obviously.
Wasn't Jeep Swenson also like mysteriously friends with Hogan? Wasn't Hogan at his funeral?
You know what? I always figure that anyone who's over 6'10" and anyone with arms bigger than 24 inches knows Hogan, because Hogan's always thinking, ooh, here's the next guy I could bring in to work with me. So that's my thinking.
I know James Caan spoke at his funeral.
James Caan spoke at Jeep Swenson's funeral?
Yes.
Well, what did James Caan say? Do we know?
From his acting? Well, he was Bane, and which one was it, Batman and Robin?
Yeah, I don't know. After the second Batman, I was done.
I think the Clooney one, right?
Yeah, I forget which one of the bad ones was the Clooney one, but yes.
Okay, I'd have to rewatch it. I always thought Val Kilmer actually did a good job.
It's not that he didn't do a good job, it's that the movie sucked.
Okay. That's fair.
And the look wasn't as good. Look, you're not going to be able to replicate what Tim Burton was able to do, but it's just, it didn't.
Well, because it was a continuation of those movies. Yeah.
Right.
But without keeping the same aesthetic.
It's a continuation of those movies, just shitty. That's really what it comes down to. It just became, what big stars can we make a Batman villain? And then we'll put a movie together around that. And they all stunk. But anyway, this is the epitome of us getting off topic again here.
But that's why people listen to the 605.
That's why, exactly. So I guess if there wasn't an oil depression, I think World Class kind of goes the same route, pretty much. I think that wasn't the thing that killed World Class. A lot of the decisions.
You left out one mistake too, which was going on TV and saying that Lance was not a Von Erich.
Yeah, well, that was the whole Lance thing is just interesting because they start talking about him after David dies, and then he comes in a year and a half later, and
actually, no, wait, didn't they have? What wasn't the initial mention actually before David died?
Oh, I don't know. I remember it after David died. It may have been. If so, that's even crazier.
Yes.
Because that means they were planning on Cousin Lance at the end of 83.
How do we capitalize on getting more Von Erichs? I'll create a nephew, Lance Lancelot Von Erich, the son of Waldo.
Waldo hadn't been in Dallas in years. I mean, I do like the idea that there would be another Von Erich because of the bullshit brother having a bullshit son. But
who they did a program with where they admitted that Waldo wasn't his brother.
Did they?
Wasn't that part one of the I know the Gary Hart telling of it is not exactly what happened.
Yeah, Gary Hart has a problem with honesty in his book.
But I believe some version of that did happen where he exposes Fritz as Jack Adkisson.
I want to say another thing. I have no relation to Waldo. He's not a real Von Erich. Where's Waldo? I don't care.
You have to remember they did also start calling him Jack Adkisson a little with the idea that he couldn't be NWA champion as Fritz Von Erich.
Did they acknowledge? Well, that's interesting because when he was the NWA president, Jack Atkinson? Did they acknowledge
but
that?
Did they bill, right, did in Dallas, did they say that the NWA president was Jack Atkinson? Probably not. I mean, he had played at SMU, though, and wrestled as Jack Atkinson in Dallas.
Yeah.
I would think they didn't say that he was the NWA president.
And then anything to tie this together at the end here. I guess the point is there really wasn't too much the UWF or WCCW could have done. I wonder how the UWF would have done if it had just concentrated on Oklahoma and Louisiana, and of course Mississippi and Houston.
Yeah.
And not expanded and not gone after that syndication package and just focused on the towns that work. Stay a little bit more with the formula from 84. Bring in young, flashy baby faces and bring in heels that could bump for them and really move. Have some excitement on the shows.
Yeah, and Watts loved big football players, so he could have brought in Dan Spivey.
Well, let's not go crazy. I mean, the other thing is, we'll talk about this one day, too. What if Watts had not taken on Oklahoma at the beginning of 82 when Leroy finally folded? What if he had just stayed with Louisiana and Mississippi?
Did he get Arkansas from McGurk, too?
Yeah. He got Arkansas and Oklahoma, and JYD was already going to Houston. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at my notes and see what the timeline was for his involvement with Houston, but that happened around that time too.
It was 82. So yeah. What's interesting about that is that then the really famous JYD stuff, like the biggest Superdome show, is before Oklahoma and Arkansas get absorbed.
Yeah. Oh, it's 2 years before it. A year and a half.
Also, I wonder if Watts had an easier time getting talent.
With the smaller territory?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you never
But then it became a bigger money territory, so...
Yeah, and you don't hear too much about people. You hear about people complaining about the trips. You don't hear people saying they turned down Mid-South because of the trips too much.
No.
Although it changes everything. You hear about all these Mid-South horrible trips. Not like they were good in Louisiana because there was no interstate. It was just like 2-lane roads everywhere you went.
Right.
But when you add, all of a sudden you add Oklahoma, it's like, guys, we're adding another state nowhere near us. Get ready to drive. Here we go.
And we're adding Arkansas, too. Wait, doesn't Jarrett run there? Shut up.
But I mean, you're right, though, about it being big money because Tulsa became a huge town.
Oklahoma City.
And Oklahoma City. Those were two of the biggest towns for the territory.
And they'd always run both on the same day.
And what'd you say?
They'd always run both on the same day, too, which was probably not fun.
Any final words here this week, Bix, for the return of What If?
I'd like to apologize to the guy whose name I accidentally made fun of.
There it is, What If? With myself and David Bixenspan, we'll have more What Ifs in the future. Again, you could submit yours to facebook.com/superpodcast. Look for the thread. Scroll down. You will see it there. Kurt, it is now time for In the News with Jim Cornette, where Jim and myself look at classic wrestling newspaper stories and discuss them, a fun segment. But this week's edition of In the News with Jim Cornette is sponsored by our friends, the wrestling fans, over at Ramsor Records. Of course, you guys know I tell you about Ramsor each week, the Mid-Atlantic Wrestling of the record industry. Of course, you can go to ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com and enter the promo code 605 at checkout and save 20% on all items. ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com, RAMSEUR, Ramsor Records. And I want to tell you a little bit about a band we talked about way back, maybe in the spring, Bombadil. They had that really great album, Fences. I still have that one song stuck in my head, Not Those Kind of People. If you don't remember, the album was recorded entirely onto tape. It's an analog recording, the way it's supposed to be. The vinyl was actually cut from the analog tapes. No computer was harmed during the final process. It's available at independent record stores. It's on iTunes. And of course, you can go to ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com. But I want to tell you a little bit about Bombadil's tour in Europe. It's the first time the band has gone overseas to perform. They're really looking forward to it. And we want to tell you a little bit about these dates coming up. November 22nd at La Chaque in Metz, France. How do you pronounce it? La Chaux? La Chaui? Is that
do not edit that out. That was classic.
Is that an? I can't tell if that's an O or a Q. I think it's La Chaui. La Chaui in Metz, France on November 22nd. The next day, November 23rd at Le Local in Strasbourg, France. On November 24th. They're going to be in Duisburg, Germany at Zum Anker. On November, don't sort of send me this as a rib. On November 25th.
If you can't pronounce the name, just say Tiger Joginder Singh.
Or Tiger Jeet Singh. But anyway, November 25th, Bombadil will be in Dusseldorf, Germany at Braus. On November 22nd, Bombadil will be in Landstuhl, Germany at the USO Warrior Center. On November 29th, in Houten, Netherlands. I don't know if this is what it is or if this is the name of the venue. It just says Secret House Show. I like the idea there's a secret house show.
I like that, from parts unknown.
I think Herb Abrams had a lot of secret house shows. November 30th, in Haarlem, Netherlands. I said Harlem. It's with two A's. It's Haarlem.
Haarlem?
In Haarlem. No, because it's LEM. Haarlem, Netherlands, at the Wolfhound. And then they're going to the UK. We have a ton of UK listeners. Check out Bombadil. On December 1st, they'll be in London at the Borderline. December 4th in Glasgow at the Broadcast. And December 5th, Milton Keynes, UK at Crawford Arms. And the tour finishes up December 7th in Paris, France, making a return to France after starting the tour there. They'll be at the Pop-In. For more information, visit ramsourrecords.com and support Bombadil. I'm telling you about that tour, but once again, I really enjoyed their album earlier this year, Fences. Not Those Kind of People. That song is really, really good, stuck in my head. And with that, Kurt, it's time for In the News with Jim Cornette. Let's go to it right now. It's time for another installment of our popular In the News segment. And of course, that means we are joined by the Keith Olbermann of the Superpodcast, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Thank you very much for comparing me to a fine, upstanding American gentleman.
We should say at the top of this that these clippings come from the fine research that Scott Teal has done with the Crowbar Press Archives. You can access these clips and so much more by going to the Crowbar Press Archives on Facebook or going to crowbarpress.com and supporting Scott's fine work. Much of it contains the finest in wrestling research. But Jim, are you ready for our first story?
I am ready, and this story comes from Miami, Florida, on Tuesday, October 29th, 1968. The headline, Wahoo retires to open tavern. The only linebacking former Miami Dolphin Wahoo McDaniel will do from now on will be behind a front four of taps. McDaniel, placed on unconditional waivers after being charged with being drunk in Denver Saturday, said he is retiring from professional football and wrestling to open a tavern here. He said that Bob Bruggers, another Dolphin linebacker waived after the incident at Denver, would help with his new enterprise. An off-duty policeman arrested McDaniel outside a tavern in Denver Saturday night before Miami played the Broncos Sunday and claimed the former professional heavyweight wrestler had backed his car into the policeman's vehicle. McDaniel was charged with resisting arrest, damage to private property, and public intoxication. Wilson said he cut Bruggers for missing curfew, even though he was not charged, and claimed to have gone to the police station only to post bond for McDaniel.
Well, a typical Wahoo story, if I may say so myself, but the involvement of Bob Bruggers is interesting considering his brief career in professional wrestling.
Well, that's right, and obviously I think it's pretty obvious that Bruggers saw the success that Wahoo was having, and Ernie Ladd and other guys like that. And also this little matter was put behind him because that was 1968. Wahoo retired from football, all right, but he was wrestled another 20 years. Bruggers, I think, probably broke in, in 70, 71 in the AWA and then was in the plane crash?
Well, Bruggers was part of Vern's training class, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
With Flair and Ken Patera.
And then ended up going to the Carolinas so that was probably all due to Wahoo, because Wahoo's the guy that put the word in for Flair to go to the Carolinas with George Scott. So, Wahoo's word was respected by a lot of guys in the business. But he couldn't stay sober before a football game, though.
Bob Bruggers' career would, of course, end in that plane crash, which ended the career of Johnny Valentine and injured Ric Flair and David Crockett. Wahoo would have a storied career, but there are so many crazy Wahoo stories. Where does this rank on the Wahoo scale, Jim? Backing into a policeman's car and then being charged with resisting arrest, damage to public property, and public intoxication the day before a big game.
Well, I said it was Tuesday.
It was Tuesday.
That's pretty much what it was like for Wahoo. That was not even – I like the one where he got mad at the punks that mouthed off to him in Charlotte, and he grabbed one of them, pulled him out of the car, and stuck his head into a bike rack so his neck was stuck.
Ooh.
That was in the Charlotte Observer.
Our next story, Jim, comes from Los Angeles, California, Thursday, November 3rd, 1955.
Wrestling referees banned after telling of rigged bouts. Los Angeles, the State Athletic Commission has placed on the unavailable list 2 wrestling referees who recently testified before an assembly investigating committee that they were advised before matches who was to be the winner. The assembly committee had promised there would be no penalty or discrimination against anyone for testimony given at its probe.
This is why whistleblowers are afraid.
Well, and they should be, these 2 fucking stooges. Goddamn rats. You know what happens to rats, don't you? They either get cheese or they get drowned, and these guys got drowned.
Oh, I thought you were going to say they get put on the unavailable list.
Well, they got put on the unavailable list, too. That's terrible. But, 1935, I'm saying it's probably a couple of boxing referees went and stooged. Hey, they told us who was going to win.
Why would they have been in trouble, though? How much influence did the office at the Olympic Auditorium have that the referees testified and then they got in trouble?
Well, probably more than those 2 stooge referees did, I'll tell you that.
Have there ever been problems where you have a referee who runs his mouth too much to impress someone or try to meet girls or anything?
Well, they're always, not limited to referees. You've always had something like that, whether anybody that gets, that's why that it was always so hard to get close to the business, and that they picked and chose who was allowed to, depending on who they thought they could trust. And, but it would always happen. I remember one time, it was actually Danny Davis's original partner in the Nightmares, Ted Allen. He basically, at Memphis at the hotel somewhere or another, he was a heel, but there were baby faces there. So long story short, he apparently put his mask on and was trying to hide behind the door in the baby faces room to watch them with the rats or whatever. And he got in trouble for that. I can't remember the exact details of the story, but there's always somebody that's going to do something. But most of the time, then that spelled the end of their access to the boys or the locker room or whatever.
Our next story, Jim, will stay in California, comes from Bakersfield, Friday, October 2nd, 1936.
Wrestler uses rattlesnake to beat opponent. Bakersfield, October 2nd. Brother Jonathan, a wrestler, pulled a new stunt for Matt fans here last night when he plucked a rattlesnake out of a suitcase at ringside and moved in on Howard Cantonwine, his opponent. Referee Ted Hopkins and Cantonwine hurriedly left the ring, but the officials from the back of the house awarded Cantonwine the match. Police made Brother Jonathan put the snake back in the suitcase, and order in the arena was restored.
There's so much great stuff here. First of all, I guess importantly, Brother Jonathan, for those of you who aren't aware, is the father of one of the all-time greats, Don Leo Jonathan.
That's correct. And of course, Don Leo Jonathan was the guy that was held up and still sometimes is to this day in terms of a big guy who could move like a small guy and was incredibly agile and et cetera. And Don Leo Jonathan for those days, I think was like 6'6", 6'7", 270, which was probably bigger than anybody in the National Football League at the time. But Brother Jonathan, who was a Mormon, I don't know, are Mormon snake handlers now?
I don't know.
Were they in 1936?
Is this the first time a wrestler brought a snake to the ring before the Sheik by at least 25 years, I would think?
Well, yeah, I would have to say so. This may have been the first snake sighting in pro wrestling in Bakersfield, California. Buck Owens his mother could have been there in the audience and scared by that snake, and the whole future of country music could have been changed.
When you think of wrestling in 1936, do you think of Brother Jonathan coming to the ring, whipping a snake out, chasing the referee and the wrestler away, and then the cops come and make him put the snake away?
Well, yeah, the cops were, if you go back and look at these old clippings, the cops were involved a lot in the old days, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s with restoring order, because you can imagine when people had never seen anything like this shit and had no idea what they were going to probably see when they went to the matches, if they'd never been before, because there was no television. And a guy takes a snake out of a suitcase and goes after his opponent, they were going to start some riots in those days.
An interesting move for 1936, but let's stay in that era, but head a little bit north, Jim. Our next story is from Montreal, Canada, Tuesday, October 19th, 1937.
Matt fans hand strangler lacing. Montreal, October 19th, United Press. Wrestling fans rioted in the ring here last night and administered a mass beating to strangler Bob Wagner of Portland, Oregon, for his rough ring tactics. When the referee attempted to disqualify Wagner in his preliminary bout with Legs Langevin, Wagner began kicking his prostrate opponent in rage. Fans promptly swarmed into the ring, beat Wagner severely before police intervened. Wagner was fined $100 for starting the riot. Well, there you go.
Not only was he beat severely, but then he was fined for it.
A mass beating, and then it cost him $100 in 1937. That'd be, about $1,500 today. Yeah, Strangler Bob Wagner had a bad night in Montreal.
That is just awful.
Just terrible.
You get your ass kicked, then you get fined for it. I don't know too much about Strangler Bob Wagner. Have you heard that name before?
I have never heard that name before in my life.
All right. Well, that's all we have to say about that story. Let's move next to New York, Wednesday, October 12th, 1938.
Wrestlers go to court over studded belt. Who owns $2,000 title emblem? Judge to make decision. New York, October 11th. A $2,000 gold belt studded with stones and virtually the only tangible thing about the so-called wrestling championship of the world has been thrown into the ring in Queens County Surrogate Court. While perhaps a score of wrestlers claim the championship, only 2 persons are contesting ownership of the belt, which is supposed to be handed around among a certain cliché, it should be clique, of grunt and groan artists as they file their claim to the title. Promoter Joe Toots Mont and Bronco Nagurski, wrestler and former football player, have been ordered to appear before surrogate John Hetherington next Tuesday. Nagurski has the belt, which Mrs. Matilda Malulich, widow of Mike Malulich, known in the ring as Mike Romano, claims is part of his estate. According to Ms. Malulich, her husband won the belt and lent it to Mont when he retired. Mont, she said, used it for publicity purposes. In a letter to Mrs. Malulich, however, Mont said Romano lost the belt to Dave Levin, who lost it to Dean Johnson, who lost it to Nagurski. Surrogate Hetherington will decide. Bar and Chancery holds barred.
A lot of interesting things in this story. And, nowadays, if someone stole the WWE title belt, everyone would know that it's the property of WWE. It wasn't always that way. And we've heard stories throughout history, Ron Fuller and Ron Garvin going to court over ownership of the Southeastern title. There have been guys, I think the Snowman stole the title from the USWA when he had that brief run.
He walked off with the belt.
This is an interesting one. I must admit, I don't know too much about Mike Romano, who apparently held the title and then lent it to Toots Mont, who came up with a story, and you got to think Toots is behind every one of those title changes that he claimed happened there. And then you have Nagurski, who, we talked about Wahoo earlier. Nagurski's probably the biggest football star ever to go into wrestling, and then he became a major wrestling star.
Well, yeah, and to the point with the belt, I guarantee you that's what happened. Toots Mont suddenly, he's booking a stable of guys. One of the boys has this pretty belt. Hey, Mike, you don't need that anymore. Let me hold on to it for you. And then they just started using it. And now the widow decides, well, hey, this is a piece of jewelry. It's worth some money. $2,000 in the 30s would be, a significant sum of money today. So she's trying to get it back. But there was no way for any outsider to determine in those days, well, who should be the owner of the belt, because there was no way to determine that the belt was being passed around, and as opposed to won and lost in an athletic contest.
And also, Mike Romano probably never smartened up his wife. So she's thinking...
and especially back in those days, that it could very well be the case, because in those days, the guys didn't even smarten up family members. It was, especially at that period of time when the business was just being formed, and the idea of bookers and talent rosters and finishes and traveling programs and etc. No, they didn't tell their wives or whatever, because in a lot of cases they were looking at it like, well, this is kind of shady. We don't want anybody to know. And it would not only have hurt the business, but it would have hurt their standing in the eyes of some of their family members who thought they were really doing this shit for real.
What concerns did you have as a promoter when you have the Smoky Mountain title and the tag team titles? In terms of, do you ever worry about the security of the belts? I'm pretty sure you didn't put it on guys that you thought would just run away with the belt, although Jake did have the belt, but he didn't have possession of the belt.
He never did. No, that's the only time And I'll tell two stories here, but the only once did it bite me in the ass. But the only time that I didn't let a guy who won the belt carry the belt around was Jake. Because he wasn't working for me full time anyway. And I think he's even the one who said, hey, you keep the belt. And I'm like, sure, absolutely, no problem. So it wasn't that big of an issue. But after we closed down, they were still using it. Randy Hales was still using it in Memphis for the Smoky Mountain USWA ongoing rivalry. And Tommy Rich ended up with it, and some way or another ended up selling it to a used car dealer that had been one of our sponsors in Knoxville. And Dennis Corluzzo ended up surprising me about a year later for my birthday by getting the belt back from him. So that's why I've still got my Smoky Mountain belt. So I made that one mistake, because I guess Tommy was like, but you know, Tommy had a belt, but he had teeth back then. Well, he's got teeth now. He just hadn't had teeth for a lot of times in the interim. So I got my belt and Tommy got his teeth.
I don't know how one thing has anything to do with the other, but what was the other? Was it Judge Auto Dealer who purchased the title?
No, it was Wayne. It was Wayne from Classy Motors. Judge Auto Dealer was merely the advertising figurehead, whereas Wayne was the boss. His name was Terry Kenner. It was the head of Classy Motors. Now, we went down there and me and Buddy Landell did a commercial at his lot, and they started this fucking car up to pull it into the shot, and just gobs of oil blew out of the tailpipe and everything. But his name, the boss was Terry Kenner, but that's only, I knew that. But if you called up, if just an average person called up, they were told to ask for Wayne, and Terry would be Wayne. So if you asked for Terry Kenner, he wouldn't get on the phone. But if you asked for Wayne, he'd get on the phone. And that way he could deny that Terry was there. I don't know what the fuck. It was a used car lot. They were sponsoring the wrestling show. So you see where we're going with that.
Paul Heyman used to do the same thing. You would call his house, you'd get his roommate who sounded suspiciously like Paul. So it's been done. It's gone from used car dealerships to guys who possibly could be successful used car dealers. But Jim, let's go to our next story. This is from a newspaper in St. Petersburg, Florida, October 23rd, 1967.
Wrestlers give city a headache. Fort Lauderdale has a unique problem. Professional wrestling matches at War Memorial Auditorium become so wild and woolly that demonstrative fans throw, break, and stomp on auditorium chairs and, of course, break and damage quite a few. The city spent $4,500 for steel chairs to replace the old wooden ones as a move to end the problem, but it didn't. More than 200 of the new steel ones have been wrecked. City fathers last week decided they'd have to raise the rent, bolt down the chairs, or just tell the wrestlers to scram.
What's the deal with people destroying chairs? Not necessarily throwing them or hitting people with them, but just destroying them.
Well, but here's the thing. A lot of times they'd get thrown, whether in the ring or at the wrestler. But also, if you go back and you look, and this was common everywhere, and I can't remember the last time that I saw it. And even especially in buildings now where they run wrestling, you should. But everybody in those days past the third row of ringside was standing on their chairs by the end of the night. Go back and watch the old films and the hot finishes, run-ins. They're standing up because the people in front are standing up. And once the people in front stand up, then the people farther back, they got to get some height on them. So and then, of course, you stand on those chairs so long or stomp on them or jump up and down on them or the kids or whatever. And yes, at OVW, we said they'd been bowlinized whenever a chair was just bent flat and out of shape. But I remember one night, the finish was so hot in Louisville that a bunch of the kids that were in the general admission section ran down to ringside and started climbing up on the merchandise table so that they could see what was going on in the ring when Jackie Fargo was making a save or whatever. And it was Petey Welch, Roy's wife, Miss Christine's driver at the time. She's trying to pull and yank all the pictures off the table before the people stand on them. And then the table collapses because there's so many people on it. And that was just people trying to see what the fuck was going on in the ring. So, yeah, it was hectic. Now, who gives a shit now? They stand up, and I guess at Ring of Honor shows they'll stand on the chairs because they're all in flat fucking buildings. They're not in real arenas and coliseums anymore for wrestling, no matter what the promotion, except for Vince. So they'll stand up on the chair just because they can't see anything, but it's not like they've been driven to run as close as they can get to this and stand up on whatever so they can get an advantage point to see this goddamn chaos. It's just like, Yeah, we fucking can't see because there's 500 of us in this rec center, so we'll stand on a chair.
It was very different because of the context, but in 1994 in ECW, there were several instances where fans, encouraged by Terry Funk, threw chairs into the ring, and eventually the promotion, sensing the lawsuit that would be impending, caused that to stop, and there were still people standing up and on chairs and watching things. But one of the things I think you've seen a few times, you've seen in the ECW, you saw it, they did it with Bob Backlund in the WWF, is when fans charge the ring. Not necessarily to attack a heel, but just to join in a celebration, to be a part of something. We've seen it happen with small, groups, not just large amounts of people, but when Harley Race wins the title in Toronto, a fan jumps in the ring. When is the first time you saw a happy fan or a group of fans jump in the ring?
Oh, God. It happened in Louisville a few times. Just you could tell the difference because when a fan was going to jump in the ring to attack the heel, generally the heel was doing something at the time, on the babyface, and the fan would jump him, where he had his attention distracted or whatever. But if the heel is down or he's already out of the ring and the babyface has the belt or he's standing up with his hands in the air and people start jumping in, then they're coming for celebration. So that was I remember this great picture. And I don't know who took it. It may have been Gary Kamensak or Gary Mancuso, one of the guys up in Detroit, but it was at the Cobo when Dusty somehow won the U.S. championship. I don't think he beat the Sheik, but he won the title. And he's got the belt. He's holding it around his waist, and all the fans jumped up on the ring and on the apron, and he kind of laid back into him, and they're all hugging him, and there's black kids, and there's white kids, and there's all kinds of people just putting their hands on Dusty. And he's bleeding from the arm, and he's holding that belt, and such a great picture that the people in those days were so happy when their hero finally won something big or got even that you couldn't keep them back. And the cops really in that situation wouldn't try that hard because they're just coming to hug this guy. Why fight him? If they're coming in to kill the heel, then you got to do something. But if they're just coming in to hug the babyface, kind of lay back a little bit and let nature take its course, and, you'll be all right.
That was certainly something Dusty liked because he replicated that when he won the NWA title at least 2 times, where he either had fans coming to the ring to celebrate with him, or he certainly seemed like he was encouraging them, please come in the ring, celebrate with me. Because he liked it, and it's a great visual, and Dusty's actually like the perfect guy for that. The whole people's champion, he's there for his people, and they want to celebrate with him when he has a good moment.
Yeah.
Our next story, Jim, is the beginning of a few stories dealing with women in various forms, one way or another. Involved in these stories, the first one is from Alfred, Maine, Tuesday, October 7th, 1924.
Wladek Zabisco granted divorce from his wife. Alfred, Maine, October 6th. Wladek Zabisco, heavyweight wrestler, today was granted a divorce from his wife on the grounds of cruel and abusive treatment. The suit was uncontested. Madam Zabisco, formerly Senorita Diaz, is 22 years old, under 5 feet in height, and weighs 100 pounds. She was married to the wrestling man in Havana in an old orchard.
And he's the one saying that he wants the divorce for cruel and abusive treatment.
Well, I think that was one of the only ways you could get a divorce back in those days, was for one person to accuse cruel and abusive treatment. But then how old would Zabisco have been, though? Like maybe in his 30s, close to 40 at that point. His brother Stanislaus, I believe, was the older of the two and the bigger star. But then the same Zabisco brothers that would retire to the farm out in Missouri and have a hand in training Harley Race. And 35 years earlier or whatever, he's a ladies' man. But I bet you he and Senorita Diaz had some fun in that fucking orchard in Havana. I'll tell you that.
I'd be willing to bet money they had fun. And also, she really probably was cruel and abusive and just yelling at him and letting him have it, even though she was very, very tiny and weighed very little.
I'm picturing like the fucking Maurice Tillet, the French Angel, and Sofia Vergara somehow with these two.
If Sofia Vergara was shorter, yes, the same personality and attitude. Jim, our next story comes from Washington State, Wednesday, March 9th, 1955.
Woman fan keeps terrible Mr. Moto in dressing room. Washington, March 10th. Hell hath no fury like a woman spectator at a wrestling match. It happened last night at Turner's Arena, where Mr. Moto and brother Frank Jers met Freddie Blassie and Jack Witzig in a team match. As the four grappled during the deciding third fall, Eleanor Clements, 20, lunged from her ringside seat and scratched Mr. Moto on the leg with a piece of broken mirror, police said. Mr. Moto was treated in the dressing room for a minor cut. He refused to continue the match, and his outmanned partner was defeated. Police booked Miss Clements on a charge of assault with a deadly weapon.
When I think of women cutting wrestlers, usually it's the old woman I think of. You know, the woman there with the purse, just so mad she has to get involved. I usually don't think of 20-year-old women bringing broken mirror glass to stab wrestlers.
Well, no, she probably had the mirror and she just broke it, you know, on purpose to stab. And also that's why they quit selling beer in bottles and things at wrestling matches back in those days. But yeah, Bill Dundee's got a scar down his chest that he has from Louisville from about 40 years ago, where this old woman with one of those old-fashioned metal nail files came at him right down the chest.
Were you there that night? You saw that?
I did not. I was there. I did not see it because it was toward the back. They had left the ring, but back in those days, it was an adventure in the gardens to leave the ring when you were a heel, to leave the ring and go a certain amount of the way back before you could get clear. So you never knew what was going to, and you could always see, it looked like bodies flying around. It was stuff just flying up in the air whenever there was a little set to.
You certainly saw a lot of fans riot and come after you. You've seen fans whip out knives, especially in Mid-South. Have you ever actually witnessed on a show you worked a wrestler get cut during their match by a fan?
No, fortunately. I have not been there or seen it in person, and I'm thankful because it probably would have been me. But Dennis Condrey, one time in Alabama, he had a scar on his arm because as he rolls out of the ring after a hot finish, this old man pulls a knife on him. And as they're standing there, Dennis grabs a chair to try to defend himself, but somebody hit him from behind and pushed him forward into the guy's knife, and it got him in the arm. So as a result, Dennis retaliated by the guy against the guy with the knife by walking the dog on him with that chair. Just hit him in the head, and the head would bounce on the floor. Hit him in the head would bounce on the floor. He said he had to leave the territory because of the lawsuit, because of the extensive fucked upness that but the guy had a knife. So there you go.
And of course, this story has Mr. Moto in it. And Mr. Moto, besides being a booker later on in Los Angeles and a big star, especially in Los Angeles, was a heat machine. This is 1955. So Pearl Harbor was closer to there than 9/11 is to now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the Japanese wrestlers and the German wrestlers that were Nazis had more guts probably than anybody in the business at that point.
Jim, our next story comes from Chicago, Wednesday, October 10th, 1951.
Final twist. Mrs. Victoria Lorenzo Ratcliffe, 34, a former circus aerialist, told a divorce judge yesterday her husband Fred, 52, went to a wrestling match on their wedding night. She was granted a divorce.
How many cases of this you think there are out there?
Oh, a bunch.
Yeah.
A bunch. And I mean, I know guys that wrestled on their wedding nights. I know people that have actually said they went to see wrestling on their honeymoons, etc. As I've said before, there was a woman in the gardens one night in Louisville that would not leave. She was giving birth. She was in labor and was on a stretcher at the EMT station and wouldn't leave until she found out who won the main event. And Christine Jarrett had to promise to call her in the hospital and tell her. So there's devotion. And
the judge was obviously sympathetic.
I think maybe he wanted some of Victoria Lorenzo Ratcliffe on the side.
Oh, well, that's a hell of an accusation out of nowhere. But let's move on now, Jim, to our final story.
Fuck that judge. What was it? Fuck your uncle judge.
One of the great Dennis Carluso moments in history. Amy Lee actually told that story on the show. But let's now, Jim, move on to our final story. This is from Salt Lake City, Utah, November 1st, 1967.
Lady wrestlers grab ring a Jim dandy. A Salt Lake City man Tuesday told police 3 lady wrestlers old enough to be grandmothers walked off with a portable boxing ring estimated to weigh about 700 pounds. The complainant, Manuel Lobato, 776 West 1st North, confusing directions, said the women were led by a woman named May. May told officials at the Guadalupe Center, 346 West 1st South, she wanted to borrow the ring, complete with steel corner posts and heavy canvas mat, to arrange a wrestling card in Salt Lake City. The 3 have not been seen since September 1st.
Well, Jim, 1967, did Mae Young already appear to be a grandmother back then? Because that's what this man is saying all the women involved in this looked like.
Well, May was closing in on 90 when she passed away, about 6-7 years ago, was it? So, hey, let's say that 20, she'd have been close to 50.
I'm guessing it's either her or the only other candidate I could think of would have been Mae Weston.
That would have been interesting. But see, Mae Weston was still in the business at that point. I don't know what Mae Young was doing in the 60s. There was a period she was out of the business, and then she was back in it. But that would be interesting. Grandmother Mae. Who else is going to steal a 700-pound wrestling ring but Mae Young?
It's a good movie. You know, it's like, remember, what was that movie they did with George Burns and, I forget who else was in it, where the three old guys rob a bank?
Oh, yeah, the senior citizen heist movie. Yeah. But who would play Mae now that Mae's gone?
She wasn't around for years. Like, you would see Moolah for years. There was no Mae Young. And then all of a sudden, in the late 90s, when they became so involved in everything the WWF was doing, she was there and they treated her like a legend. But until that point, Mae Young was like, every now and then you'd see her name in a magazine, but it wasn't like she was a regular part of Moolah's stable or someone that you ever heard about or saw on TV.
No, I don't think Mae was living with Moolah back then at her compound down there. I think Mae spent some time in California, and then it was probably one of those deals where, you know, when she finally got back together. I don't mean back together in a romantic way. I'm not commenting on that either way. I'm just saying when she probably, you know, wanted to move someplace else and needed a place to go. Moolah was there, had the compound where she had, you know, her midget, Katie. She always used to introduce Diamond Lil as, here's my midget. But, you know, she had some of the girls living there, and that's how they probably got together. Two women in the golden years spending their last days with each other. So that's when, because Mae was probably had a little bit of a hand in in-ring training on Moolah at some point, at least, since Mae was a veteran by the time Moolah came along. So you never know about these things.
Yeah, and if this isn't Mae Weston, if this is in fact Mae Young, we may have figured out where Moolah got her ring. Right here. May have gone from Salt Lake City right to the Carolinas.
Well, at least she wasn't Sam Miniker stealing airplanes.
Yeah, he stole Stu Hart's airplane, right?
Well, and then also he took somebody else's to fly back to, was it Kozak or was it Blanchard? The thing, he was working in Calgary and borrowed Stu Hart's airplane and without Stu knowing about it, flew to Texas to take a job down there in that territory. And so he didn't really steal the plane because, you know, Stu could have gotten it if he wanted to go to Texas for it. But later on, Stu hired him back and he flew back to Calgary in a plane that he had stolen from, I think it was Joe Blanchard.
Wow.
In Texas.
Wow. The plane thief, Sam Miniker.
But once again, he didn't keep them, so he didn't really steal them. He just used them.
I don't think that matters. If you take something, you stole it. Even if you leave it on the side of the road and say, I don't need this anymore.
What about if you call somebody and say, hey, come back and pick it up?
You still took it. You stole the thief.
Well, it's a mitigating circumstance.
Yes, and we'll talk more about thieves' rights later on here on the show or in a future episode of the Super Podcast. Jim, as we close out this episode of In the News, what are your final words?
My final words, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
There we go. Another edition of In the News with Jim Cornette. Another edition will be coming at you pretty soon. One of the most popular segments on the show. And it's so much fun to do that. So much fun to sit with Jimmy and go over these old articles because we always find some really cool stuff. And now we're going to debut a new segment on the show, Front Row Section D. If you were a smart fan, if you read the Pro Wrestling Torch in the early 90s, you heard all about Front Row Section D. And more than likely, the antics of John Hitchcock at ringside. John used to sit ringside in Greensboro, the aforementioned Front Row Section D, and cheer for the heels, bring signs, and cause trouble. He was the enemy of every single babyface that worked there, and the stories are hysterical. We're going to tell you about his book on the other side of this segment. It is our book of the week. But right now, let's go to Front Row Section D with John Hitchcock. I'm happy to welcome to the Super Podcast John Hitchcock, who was just recently on Jeff Baldwin's great podcast, Breaking Kayfabe with Jeff Baldwin, and I thought It was one of the funniest and one of the best wrestling podcast episodes I've ever heard. And I said, I need John on the Super Podcast immediately. And he's on the line right now. John, thank you for being here today.
Well, gentlemen, I'm here and I'm in good spirits. So fire away. Let's get the show on the road.
You know, I was thinking, you told so many stories, and I know there are more, and we'll tell some today, about sitting at that front row Section D spot and just torturing baby faces. I mean, it's really the only word you could think of for that.
Well, you like to stir up the mix, you know? You like to stir it up.
Sure.
And the thing is, back then, you know, 2/3 of the audience were total believers. And as more and more we made our presence known by finally getting on the front row, and then one night I came up with the idea. I said, look, we're all going to wear coats and ties, you know, and sunglasses, because we're going to cheer for the bad guys, you know. So we want to look like, we want to style and profile. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we didn't realize as time went on that we kind of became the backdrop of Crockett all during from like 1984, 85 into 91. Our group was always there. And it became really identifiable because of the suits, but then also with the posters that we would make.
A lot of smart fans began to know these stories because of appearances in newsletters. You know, the Pro Wrestling Torch had a pretty strong front row Section D element for a very long time. So front row Section D almost became a legendary thing.
Well, you know, it's funny because I still think the guy at ECW that was wearing the straw hat, was copying me, which is, you know, which is cool. I don't know what that guy's name is, but there's no doubt he was definitely trying to emulate. And one time, Obin Johnson and Big Eddie and I went to a Smoky Mountain reunion thing, and Brian Hildebrandt was he's a great guy and really funny, and you know, God bless him. Anyway, we were walking across this parking lot with him, and these two guys from ECW showed up that were fans, and they were bothering Hildebrandt. So of course, what did Hildebrandt do? He goes, "Do you know who these guys are?" And they were like, no, you know. And I was like, I was like, look at Brian, like, come on, man, leave me alone. And he goes, nah, this is front row Section D, man. We've heard enough. and those guys went, oh my God, you're the father. And then they started bowing to us. And I was like, we got to get the hell out of here, man. You know, we got to go and get out of here. And those guys followed us, and we had to duck out and get away from it. So, you know, it's nice that people noticed, but the signs suddenly became lightning rods because people started looking for them. And when WCW took over and the thing started to crash, I swear, you think I'm crazy, but I get phone calls from guys, and they would say, are you going tonight? And I was like, oh, hell yeah, you know, it's wrestling, man, we're going to go. And he goes, well, we were trying to decide if we were going to go or not, you know, because there's only like 3,000 or 4,000 people there. He said, but the deal was, if you were going to be there and you guys made signs, we were going to go. Because you're worth going, because the wrestling sucks. And I was like, God, that's really weird. You know what I mean? I mean, that's like weird that you make, because to me, wrestling was it, and it always will be it. It's just something that I've always, I don't know, ever since a little kid, I was magnetized to it. I was pulled to it. I love it like nothing else, except maybe Carolina basketball and comic books. So it became like the thing, and people went crazy. I mean, especially during that time period when we first started doing it and we got down to the front row, people went crazy. I mean, there were people. Did I ever tell you the story that one day I decided, just for the hell of it, to dress like Bubba Rogers? and I don't know why, but I said, this is easy. You know, I already got a suit. And this lady walked up to me during intermission, and she said, Bubba, Big Bubba. And I looked at her like, yes. And she looked at me and she said, would you bless my baby? I went, and I stood up and I put my hand on her kid's head and I went, you're blessed. And she went, oh, thank you. And she ran away. And I'm thinking, that's the dumbest shit. That's the dumbest shit ever. You know, I mean, but it was, you know, people, you know, the funny thing about the front row too is once we got that front row section and we had that established with a certain group of guys, then smart fans and heel fans would start to get seats in the second, third, fourth, fifth row. So it became almost like a weird fan block of heel fans and smart fans that would sit there. So we were kind of protected, you know. You know, the reason why we did the front row anyway is because we needed security, because people wanted to kill us. People wanted to just beat the shit out of us. You think I'm kidding, but that's the way the heat was back then. It was crazy.
How often did security want to kill you? Doug Dillinger must have hated you.
You know, it's a love-hate thing with that guy. I knew at one time he was a cop, But he kind of just stayed. We never did anything where we like jumped the rail. You know what I mean?
Right.
We never did anything, but if the signs were,
but you certainly upset the booker.
Well, if the sign, one time we decided we were going to go all out, and I made signs in big letters that spelled out "Dusty sucks," and it was going to be huge. And this was a TV thing, and you're not going to believe this shit, but I swear to God. And so I'm carrying these signs in. And just as I get up there, there's David Crockett, Doug Dillinger, and like 3 or 4 Greensboro's finest, the cops. And David Crockett goes, there he is. And these cops descended on me. And they were like, and David Crockett ran up and he goes, you're not bringing those signs in tonight. You're not bringing those in. I said, come on, David. I said, it stirs up the show. It's fun. He goes, no, you're not bringing those goddamn signs in. You're not going to fuck up our show. So you leave, you throw them somewhere, but you can't bring them in. And I'm looking at cops. They have guns. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of a pacifist kind of guy. I was like, what? And he says, yeah, you can't bring them in. And I went, and that's the first time we ever got stopped at the border. It was like, you're not. I had to hide them out underneath a pine tree and never got to use them. One of the guys wanted to go. When David Crockett was calling, he was there with Shivani and Dr. Tom Miller and God, what was the timekeeper's name? He was there forever. He was part of the riot squad back in the 40s and 50s. Wally Dusick. And one of the guys had the idea of suddenly, in the middle of a Dusty match, to suddenly yell out, look at Dusty, and then headbutt the front row in juice and go, look at Dusty, look at Dusty. But I said, well, I don't think we need to do that. He does that for a living, and we're not getting paid. I don't think that's a really good idea. I'd like to say that was Bruce Mitchell's idea, but it was my idea, and I suddenly realized I'd made a huge mistake. So, anyway, so it got just crazy. And so this shows you ingenuity. I would go to Sears and buy a bed sheet, and I'd tear it in half, and then I'd draw the banner, what we wanted to push, what our agenda was as far as cheering for the heels. And I'd fold it up and stick it in the back of my pants and then walk in. There were people still waiting going, there he is. He doesn't have anything. Then we pulled the banner out when we needed to. Boom. Put it across the front. Yay. And here comes Doug Dillinger. You got to take that down. Okay. Great. Fine. Okay. At least we got it. At least we made our point, so that was cool. But I think the story that set the whole thing off on a whole different level was the Horseman Romper Room night.
Right. I mean, and that's one of the things, I'm glad you brought this up because everyone knows the story. No one's ever been able to find the exact interview where Arn Anderson says that him, Tully, Ole, and Rick are the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. No one's ever found it. And we know that it's from that interview that the name was created and that the name was assigned to these guys. But it's really one night in Greensboro with you as the ringleader that really christened them the Horsemen.
Well, I contend, and everybody says I'm wrong, that, that was a Georgia interview. And now everybody's saying it may be a local interview. But if it was local, we saw it, in Greensboro, North Carolina. So we just thought that was hysterical that Arn called himself, they were like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And we're like, we got to do something with that. That's perfect. So, all this time, Ric Flair and even Greg Valentine, a little bit before that, was, they call Ricky and Robert Romper Room. So anyway, we decided, I had this idea that what we were going to do is we're going to spell out Horseman. It was a simple thing, but it took forever. Back then, you had those markers with the little nibs on it. Yeah. You didn't have those big ass markers. Thank God for Obin Johnson. He found the markers with the wide nib on them. Shit, I could do it in 10 minutes. This took a week of customers would come into my store. This is when I worked downtown at Acme Comics. And customers would come into the store, and I'd say, hey, man, you got a half an hour? You got 15 minutes? And the guy would go, yeah. And I'd hand him a marker, and he'd be filling in H. So we spelled out Horseman across the front. But stuck in my mind was the fact that Ric Flair had called them Romper Room because, they were into the little girls and the T-shirts, and the Horsemen were in the big girls with the sweaters, if you get my drift.
Yes.
So anyway, it was also the first time we ever merged with another group. There was a group that, I mentioned on Bowden's podcast, there was a group of guys that used to wear Russian shirts with Crusher Ivan and Nikita on the back. It was Billy and Jimmy Pritchett and a great friend of mine. I was the best man at his wedding, Bud Grundy. And it turned out that Bud's brother, Dan, Diamond Dan, was coming into my store, and we hit it off. So we decided we were going to get tickets together. For the first time, we're going to have a group, like a substantial 10 people, sitting in the same aisle. And this wasn't front row. This was in the orange seats. And the orange seats are the first risers where the ring is. So they're great seats. I mean, they're perfect seats. And so I met these three guys, and they were wearing tape, white surgical tape over their noses. And I went, oh my God, because they just ran that angle where they beat up Ricky Morton and broke his nose. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect. So he had, give it to those guys, they had a roll of tape with them. So we all put tape on our noses and sat there in our orange seats. Now, I didn't have to act like I was a Russian, like I did in the past. I was just going to be, smart ass fan. And we carried the posters. And I told him, I said, we're going to turn this place upside down when we do this shit. Because nobody's ever done it before. Nobody's ever hit it that hard as far as being a smart fan. And like I told you, when I was a kid, I was a heel fan before I was anywhere near a smart fan. And even today, they don't think I'm very smart. But anyway, so we go up and we sit down. And immediately people start buzzing about it because they see that tape. And this one lady, she was probably 35. She walked up to us out of nowhere, and we were all in our 20s, right? She was an older person, and she walked up, and she got right over to us, and she goes, I have one question for you. I said, sure. Yes, ma'am. What is it? She goes, are you wearing that tape to support Ricky Morton, or are you wearing that tape to make fun of Ricky Morton? And we looked at him. I said, you mean Hoot and Punky? You got to be kidding me, baby. We're here for the Horsemen. We're here for Flair and Arn and Tully and Ole. We're here for the real men. And and then we looked at her and I said, and that lady was so mad she stormed off, and she told other people that we were like the devil. So people started coming by and yelling at us, just yelling, We had, it was Obin and Eddie and Steve Stamper and a few other guys and this new group. So we kept stirring it up and having fun and all that stuff. And then they had an intermission. And during the intermission, we realized that we had a lot of heat. I'm telling you, brother, we were being surrounded by fans who wanted to beat our ass. And I'm sitting there just, and what do you do when people start yelling at you?
Right.
You just cut promos on them, right?
Well, I don't know.
You cut promos on them because you watch the stuff. So you're going, hey, baby, if that's a hope chest, you better keep hoping. You'll never be Horseman material with something like that. If those are pancakes, you might flip them, We start talking shit. And one great thing was there's only two people that are louder than me. One of them's Billy Pritchett, and the other one's a guy named Mark Simpson. Mark Simpson is known around Greensboro and North Carolina as the loudest man in America. He can yell forever, and his voice never gives out. So we're sitting there, and whenever I'd run out of gas, and as you know, I don't. But whenever I run out of gas, I step back, and Bud and Billy and Obin, and we start talking more shit, and we start cutting on these people and driving them crazy because we're basically telling them the stuff that the Horsemen, that Flair and them have been talking for years. And it's getting them more and more agitated. It's getting them more and more angry. And then suddenly we get hit with a drink. And I just yell out, you're all a bunch of cowards. If you're going to do it, you got to. One thing you learn real quick, okay? When you're in character, by God, you stay in character. You do not suddenly turn babyface in front of a mob. You got to stay in character. You got to. You got to, because they may not like us, but eventually they will learn to respect us. Anyway, so they had an intermission, and Dan Grandi there was a rain out, and the Greensboro Bats AA, AAA baseball team was sitting with him up in the top. And he was watching this thing because it's becoming a fiasco. Matter of fact, it's the only time in the history of the Greensboro Coliseum that I remember that they had two intermissions. And the reason why is there was so much heat that the wrestlers were walking out from underneath from the dressing room to find out what the fuck was happening. Because we were surrounded, and you think I'm bullshitting, we were surrounded by 400, 500, 600 people, all wanting a piece of us. And they're yelling and screaming, and they're going nuts. And I'm sitting there, and then suddenly a buddy of mine, Taryn Colson, who always got passes to sit in the press box, and he's like being generous, 7,000 pounds. He runs down, and he goes, "If you need any help, just signal, and I'll come and help fight you. We'll fight our way out of here." And I went, "Get the hell out of here, you jerk." I said, "Man, you know who Ric Flair is? You're talking about the man, the myth, the legend. Come on. You're talking about the great Ric. You're talking, I want my son to, I don't have a kid. I want my son to grow up like Ric Flair." And he looks at me, and there's fear in his eyes. I mean, it's like, and I'm like, get the hell out of here. I can handle a bunch of idiots. These people are all morons. They need to see the light. They need to know about the great horseman. They need to know about Arn, how great Arn Anderson is. I mean, toot toot, brother, blow your own horn. So we're talking this shit. And then Dan comes down. And I thought Dan, Dan has, lives in a real world kind of thing. So Dan walks down, he goes, "John, you need to take a break and take a look and see what the hell's going on." And I went, "Oh, now come on, man! These bunch of morons, blah blah, these rednecks." And then Oben and Eddie would start talking shit. And I stood up and I looked. Swear to God, we were surrounded by at least 500 or 600 people. They were in the aisles in front of us, aisles on the side of us, and lined up behind us. And they were yelling and screaming and wanting to kill us. And
were you in your suits that night?
No. We were just we were civilian garb. So we're sitting there. And I suddenly realized, you know what? This is going to get nasty. Now, the main event was Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard versus the Rock and Roll Express for the World Tag Team titles. Now, Flair was world champ, Tully was U.S. champ, and Rock and Roll were the World Tag Team champs, right? And I suddenly realized Tully and Arn ain't winning the tag belts. They're gonna do the job, and Ricky and Robert are going to win. And then these people are going to descend on us and try to kill us because we are talking so much shit. It's incredible. This one lady walked up to me and she said, "During intermission, I wrote a poem to pray for your soul, and I'd like to read it to you." I'm not bullshitting. Lady sat there and read this poem. And I looked at her and I went, "Thanks. That brings a lot of enlightenment to me. Please go back to your cheap seats. I don't want to talk to your ass anymore." And it was incredible. I mean, people were like yelling. One lady walked up and she said, You said I'm not horseman. I'm not a Ric Flair material. And I said, and one of the guys said something like, "Are those mosquito bites, baby? As far as her tits are concerned." And she said, "Are these big enough for you?" And she pulls her sweater up and shows us her tits. and of course, I look at her and I went like, "You need to lose another 30 or 40 pounds before you start hanging out with Ole and Arn." You know what I'm saying? Flip those pancakes. You know what I mean? So she stormed off. She told more people, "It's on. They're surrounded us. They want to fucking kill us." So I realize we are treading on some very thin ice here because we have turned all the hatred for the heels on us. And here comes the main event. And here comes Tully, and here comes Flair, and here comes JJ, and they come walking out, and they come, and they get into the ring, and then I go, "Now," and we flip the signs and we spell out "Horseman" with an exclamation point. JJ sees it first, jumps up, grabs Tully, and goes, "Look at that!" And Tully goes, "Oh man, that's great!" And then he runs over and grabs Flair, and Flair is like turns around and sees it, and he goes, "That's awesome! That's awesome!" And he points to us. Now, they were just celebrating the moment, right? But they were putting more heat on us, brother. They were pointing us out even more. Of course, you couldn't miss it. It was big poster-sized boards in black spelling out Horseman. Then we flipped it, and it said Romper Room. When that happened, JJ was on the floor. He jumps up in the ring, and he goes, "Oh, my God, that's great." And he grabs Tully, and he goes, "You got to see this shit." And he points, and he sees the Romper Room, because just as we flipped Romper Room, they started playing, dumba-dumba-dumba-dumba-dumba, rock and roll is king. And Ricky and Robert are kind of coming out. And Tully sits on the second turnbuckle, grabs his stomach, and points, and is laughing his ass off. And I'm like, it's worth it if we make those guys happy. As much as they've given us, as much as we love it, and these are the best. And then JJ grabs Flair and spins him around. And then Flair does the Flair strut, whoa! And he gets on the second turnbuckle and he points at it and goes, "You're the man! You guys are the man!" And we're like, holy shit, Ric Flair just said hello to us. This is the fucking greatest shit. So we flip the signs over and we put them down. And so then Ricky and Robert run in the ring, and the crowd's going crazy. I mean, this is just, unfortunately, it wasn't a pay-per-view. This is a house show with probably 12 to 14,000 people in attendance, okay? That's how they packed them in during the Crockett days. Everybody went. And as soon as Ricky and Robert hit the ring, Tully, Flair, and JJ point to us, and we hold up Horsemen. And Ricky and Robert are looking at it like, what the fuck is that? And then, I swear to God, it's like JJ, they spin their finger and we flip it to Romper Room. And we got the tape on our nose. And Ricky and Robert went, holy, like what the fuck? You just see it. There's their shoulders slumped a little bit, like, what the hell is this? And then we started to chant, broken nose, broken nose, broken nose. They started throwing popcorn at us. They started throwing drinks at us. It was just insane. And we're sitting there, and then I looked at all the guys, and I said, this has been great, but we need to plan an escape route because Ricky and Robert are not going to lose the world tag belts because Flair and Tully can't defend them. They can't defend everything, right? Of course, knowing Tully and Flair, they probably could have. Anyway, so they started the match, and it's the classic. Ricky and Robert are not selling. Kind of shocking, and Flair and Tully are selling all over the place. And the heat's rising, and we put the posters down real quick because it's like, uh-oh, this shit's on. We flipped them over once or twice, and then that was it. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Tully grabs a chair, wedges it in the second and third turnbuckle. And Flair grabs Ricky Morton, who's got the hot little partial hockey mask kind of thing on his face.
Yeah.
And he grabs Ricky Morton by the hair and the back of his trunks, runs him face first into the chair, and then pins him clean. Man, the only time I've ever been happy with that is when I was like 10 and I got a bicycle. You know what I'm saying? At Christmas, we exploded. Hell yeah. We got all the belts now, baby. Horseman rule, baby. We got all the belts. We're yelling this at everybody. We are your champions. We are your champions. And I'm telling you, and what was great is we're going, this is the best. And we're yelling, screaming, we're jumping up and down. We knew it. We told you, people. We told you. They hate that shit. We are your champions, and we told you. And then my favorite line is, all we're trying to do is help you. We're trying to help you to see the light, brother. To see the light. That Ric Flair's a great man. That Tully Blanchard's a great, great human being. And then suddenly, Dr. Tom Miller gets into the ring, and he goes, ladies and gentlemen, the winner of the match, Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, this was not a match for the World Tag Team title. This was a non-title match. They changed the steps of the match because they wanted us to live and get out of there alive.
Wow.
You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. They changed the steps because, as I said, it doesn't make sense for them to have all the belts. But anyway, and all those people that surrounded us, hundreds of people, they all just dissipated. They all just disappeared. And we're yelling, where are all those rock and roll fans? Yeah. And we're like, God, this is the greatest. I mean, this is going somewhere that, as Captain Kirk would say, no man has gone before. And so we leave. We carry the signs out. We found out later if we left signs, people would find them on the floor, and they take them to other shows and hold them up and try to get attention. So we had to always take our signs with us. It was kind of a badge of honor to steal one of our signs, I guess. So anyway, we were like, this is one of the great nights. And obviously we pulled the tape off our noses as we walked through the crowd and got the fuck out of there. Anyway, so J.J. Dillon and Tully Blanchard have mentioned these that night. I ran into J.J. at one of the Charlotte reunion shows, and he's walking around. I said, look, I hate to bother you, but you're walking around here, so obviously you want somebody to bother you. And he starts laughing. And I said, you remember that night? He said, there's a lot of things I don't remember, but I'll never forget that as long as I live. He said, you guys were brave, man. Nobody had ever done that. There'd never been heel fans that have stood up in unison and cheered like that before. He said, that's like the birth of the hardcore fans. That's the first time it happened. And then he said, I think it was Tully did an interview locally on a radio station. And Tully said, that night when they were in the dressing room, Jim Crockett, not big Jim Crockett, but, the younger one.
Yeah. He
went down to the locker room. And he walked in the locker room and he goes, what the hell's this Horseman stuff? Where'd the hell that come from? What's that shit? What is that? Because he didn't know. And they went, well, Arn called us the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse on an interview, and those guys grabbed it and ran with it. They called us the Horsemen. And Jim Crockett said, well, I tell you one thing, it sure looks like that's getting over. So from now on, you four guys are the Horsemen. We're going to run with this. We're going to push this because this is hot. Did you see that crowd? They wanted to kill those guys. This is great. That's a true story. Now, am I claiming that I created the Four Horsemen? No. I'm just saying that our group pushed it a notch to get attention to it, which, we didn't take any bumps, any of that stuff. But that's what happened, and that's what caused the Horsemen to suddenly be referring to themselves as the Horsemen. And it's just that one big night because nobody ever seen anything like it. It was a fiasco as far as the way the fans acted. They wanted to kill us. So that's how it happened. Now, I've been criticized by this. I've been haunted by this. There's been podcasts saying that I'm a liar, that it never happened, that I'm making it up, and that the girl I was seeing at that time, Angie, was a liar. And people have gone crazy about this. Bottom line is, ask JJ or ask Tully. They'll remember. Flair might remember. But, I'm telling you, that was when it all happened, and that's when it all broke down. And that's when the Horsemen suddenly became the Horsemen, was that night. Okay, I stand for applause. Thank you.
There he is, John Hitchcock. A fun segment. More next week. But a really cool story about how the fans in Greensboro christened the Horsemen and almost cost John and his friends their lives. But now, Kurt, it's time for Book of the Week.
Did you say Book of the Week?
Book of the Week.
Yeah!
Is that for true?
That's for true. And our Book of the Week this week is Front Row Section D by John Hitchcock. It's available at tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. It's a fun book. If you enjoy the stories that John told here today, if you enjoy the stories that he told on Jeff Baldrin's amazing podcast, Breaking Kayfabe with Jeff Baldrin, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the stories coming up soon, you will love this book. It's filled with stories of chaos and troublemaking in Greensboro. You should check it out. Once again, Front Row Section D, our Book of the Week by John Hitchcock, available at Amazon. And if you're going to go to Amazon, use tinyurl.com/superpod. Amazon. By using that link, you spend the same amount of money you would normally spend at Amazon. It's just we get a little bit of love and support from our friends, our partners over at Amazon. And it's great. You could buy anything you want. You don't pay anything more. You don't have to do anything complicated. You add it to your cart. You buy it. It's like your regular Amazon experience, except you use our referral link. It's a way to help out this show and keep the show the way it is. This show is not loaded with ads. If I wanted to, I could have an ad every single segment easily because I've turned down a lot. I don't want that. This is a special show to me. This is a listener-supported show. So if you want to keep it the way it is, if you love the Super Podcast, please consider using tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. And don't just use it for yourself. Give it to your girlfriend, your wife, your boyfriend, your mistress, whoever it may be. If you're having an affair with your secretary, you're probably going to need her to buy some stuff. tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. That is the only link you need. And don't forget the holidays are coming up. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. I was about to say and more. Is there more? I guess. And more! New Year's. Who buys New Year's gifts? Start buying New Year's gifts. My birthday's coming up. Listen, for all the upcoming holidays, please use tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. Lots of other shows have links they want you to use. The really shitty shows. The shows with the millionaires at Podcast One. It doesn't matter. They all want you to support their show. And I need you to sit down and really think about it and say, I know every week Brian comes on the show and says, it's us or them. Which one should you choose? But really, which shows suck and which shows don't? Which shows actually have quality audio, quality guests, quality hosts, and which shows are just the bottom of the fucking toilet? I think if you think about it for a second, the answer will be clear. When it comes down to it, when it comes down to us or them, fuck those guys. Support the Super Podcast.
Fuck them. I'm telling you. Fuck them. And when you go to Amazon, use that link to buy the book, Boater's Guide to the Upper Florida Keys. From Jewfish Creek to Long Key.
Okay.
Highly recommended. It has one review. on Amazon called, it has a review by Dr. Jerry Graham. 4 stars. I searched for this book in quest of the fact and lore of the greatest creature known to mankind, the elusive Jewfish we call Digby. The title of this publication swerves the modern folklorist by mentioning Jewfish Creek in hopes of hooking the would-be reader into thinking that he would find in these pages the account of the day Eddie and I were scuba diving off the Florida Keys. But nowhere does this book document the haunting encounter we had with Digby. We were trying to spear gun a nice supper, enjoying the flow of the agua, when I looked to my left, and lo and behold, I was eye to eye with a 2,000-pound Jewfish. I'm telling you. A 2,000-pound Jewfish. He tried to suck me up like a vacuum cleaner and Hale's crumbs, so I wrestled him. Even in that moment of danger, I was amazed that he looked as big as that giant movie dog they called Digby. Thus I named him. We fired a spear. It lodged into the Jewfish's gut, but he did not so much as flinch. I'm telling you the truth. But thanks to my years of doing my dons and my buttocks via Tiger Gindar Singh, my stamina prevailed. I loosed myself from the gooey jaws of Digby. I punched him between the horns, and he whirled in anger. He whirled and was ready to charge me and Eddie while we paddled like madmen to the surface of the sea, Digby in hot pursuit of his meal. As a last resort, I shot a spear away from the Jewfish. The side of the speeding water arrow distracted Digby just long enough for us to get on our boat and speed to Havana. For weeks, we cast nets and spears into the sea of that vicinity, but we never did catch the Jewfish.
Support your Super Podcast.
And use the link. Fuck those guys.
Kurt, where did that come from? What the hell?
One night, I was driving the dock home, and, as usual, he had ingested his spirits. And out of nowhere, he just turns and stares at me close and tells me about the time that he and Eddie were scuba diving, and the way he looked at me, he goes, and then there was a giant Jewfish in front of us, and he stares at me like I'm supposed to know what a Jewfish is. And I just kind of smile, and he says, "Kid, I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you the truth." And he had this big story about how they wrestled a 2,000-pound Jewfish who tried to suck them, just out of the sea and into its lungs.
Wow.
And I was chuckling between each sentence, and every time he would just look at me exasperated, saying, "I'm telling you the truth." And we looked it up in the dictionary, and there is such thing as a Jewfish. It's been renamed since to sound, I think, a little more correct.
I hope so. As a Jew, I hope
it's
so.
a very dated, offensive name for a fish, but still, to Doc, it was the Jewfish.
Well, with that said, it's now time for part 2 with Kevin Sullivan. Last time we had a great talk. This time, you may even like this one better. We're going to talk about a lot of things, including what led into Kevin's turn to the dark side upon his return to Florida in 1982. Really cool stuff here. Check this out. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Kevin Sullivan. Well, let's go back and talk about something that was pretty special, and I want to talk to you about your heel turn, but I was just reminded recently of an angle that I've always loved, and I recently watched it again for the first time in a while, and it's so strong, and you're in the middle of it. It is you and Tony Atlas in the Georgia studio against Alexis Smirnoff and Ivan Koloff, and it's a really good match. The fans are totally into it, and then they do the ether angle, and we've all seen the ether angle, and they knock out Tony Atlas, and you help carry him off. And one of the things that made the angle so strong and so much different than other ether angles is they go back to Gordon, and you see Tony Atlas being taken away, and they go to Gordon, and he's surrounded by the fans on the set. He has a couple of African-American kids, a couple old ladies, all sorts of different people, and he's asking them, he goes, "What happened?" And they're saying, "It's ether, it's ether." And the woman says she's a nurse. She knows for sure it's ether. So strong. So much credibility in that angle.
It was good. I mean, when Gordon was hired by Eddie Graham, I heard the story 1,000 times. Eddie said, "You treat this as a sport. There's no comedy at all." And Eddie's business was wrestling. And Gordon, he'll give 3 rounds to a buzzsaw, you know what I mean? The souffle. I mean, Gordon made everything legit. And Gordon could take my persona that was so way out there at the end and have the people believe that there still was credibility in my ability. Gordon was the best. I mean, he, you know, we talked about Lance. Lance, hats off to Lance. I don't think he gets enough credit because Lance was a factor there that he was the voice of reason during some ridiculous and see, the thing about Memphis that people don't realize, they had a pass. There was no TV ever coming in against them until national television. St. Louis TV didn't come there. Houston TV, New Orleans TV.
Even Southeastern, the other side of the state.
So they could get away with what they wanted to get away with. But Lance did a great job of being the straight man in the stone face. He never got to do, I think, he deserved.
With Gordon, it's interesting. I thought about him recently because I've been binge watching a lot of old Mid-South wrestling for a project I'm doing. And one of the things that comes across is just how credible the wrestling is because of the commentators, because Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce are mostly Bill Watts, just explaining everything, making everything make sense. And I once read something that Bill Watts said, and I always found it really interesting. It's one of those things that always stayed with me, that when he first got to Florida, he did a promo, and, you know, whatever he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he called Gordon an idiot, and he really put down Gordon. And Eddie Graham pulled him aside and said, don't ever do that again. What you don't realize, because he had done that in other places, if you destroy the credibility of my commentator, you destroy the credibility of my show. Call your opponent whatever you want, but never say anything to the host, to Gordon. And Watts kept that for the, you know, if you ever watch any Bill Watts wrestling, you'll notice wrestlers don't talk down to the commentator. The commentator is the voice of reason of the program. And with you, when you went to the dark side, I don't know if it would have been as effective with someone other than Gordon, because Gordon was so diametrically opposite of what you became that it helped really lay it in as to how special you were, because you had this steady, you know, reasonable commentator next to you.
And I never questioned Gordon. The only, you know, there was an invisible wall between me and Gordon. It was like a Trump-Hillary debate, okay? It was like I would not ever, I would question him sometime, but then here's what after we got it, we started to play off of each other so well. He, you know, and the thing is, I didn't start as that character. It was a slow transition. It was like, I was Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I only took a sip of and I wasn't hairy and ugly after that sip. I just had a little bit longer teeth, you know?
Yeah.
I started at A and ended up at Z, and Gordon played along with me. But when I got to about, I'm going to say R, I started to do things like this to Gordon. Gordon was a Mason. So I would say, you know, I know you got the wisdom from the East. And MVP, whose father was a Mason, thought I was talking to Gordon about that. He said that was one that slapped me to it, that you were legit. And I used to say to Gordon, we all have things in our closet that made us a little crazy. You can think I'm crazy. You can think I'm off, Gordon. But I would never yell at him. It was this type of voice. And I used to say, when you were in Tutawela in Samoa, do you want me to talk about Princess Anunga and the little ones? Well, Mr. Sullivan, let's not get on a personal basis here. You know, now people start to say, Jesus, is Gordon got kids in Samoa? You know, it's like we all got stuff to hide, except the internet tells everything. But I would say stuff like that to him all the time. And he would play upon it like it wasn't like a smirk on his face. It was like horror. How do you know? You know what I mean? Eddie Graham, nobody ever touched Gordon the whole time I ever was around Florida, ever heard of Florida, except one time at the very end, Eddie wanted Jesse Barr to get over, and he grabbed Gordon, but that was it. There was an invisible wall. I mean, you could fight up to the desk, but you could knock Gordon over. You couldn't grab his microphone. You couldn't grab anything because I met Funk Sr. one time, and Eddie stole a lot from Funk Sr. The Boys Ranch.
Yeah.
On and on, doing good in the community, on and on and on. And Eddie asked him to watch my match when I was a young babyface, and I came up, and there was this room where the ambassadors sat at Fort Homer, Hesley Armory. And he came in, and I was at awe. All three of them were in there, all three Funks. And he said to me, just remember this, once you stop taking this as a sport, your credibility is gone and you won't draw money. And he said to me, somewhere down the line, you're going to be a heel. He said, and you can be a heel, but throw some of I used to do some wrestling moves. He said, throw the wrestling moves that you know in there, because we'll have the people wondering why you're a heel if you know how to do a fire miscarry, go behind a switch or something like that. He said, keep the people off their feet so they think it's a contest. And that 20 minutes with Senior stuck in my head. And then, I went from Senior, I went from Eddie and that 20 minutes with Senior, and then Jim Barnett, and, Bill Watts said he got his degree with Eddie.
Yeah.
I don't think Bill got it totally, and no one else is going to say that, but I don't think he got it totally. Dusty was another one that got it. A guy that never gets his due about being smart was Sir Oliver Humperdinck. He was a brilliant guy. He'd been around Dusty and Eddie a long time. So we all kind of came from that educational school. And Jim Barnett, we all came from that educational school that you got to have the people maybe not believe everything, but believe that you have the ability to do damage if it was legit. And that's why I'm saying about the big kid, I can't believe that's what they did.
You mentioned that Funk Sr. said one day you would be a heel. When did you first start thinking about being a heel?
The day I realized that baby faces were glory happy, and I was one of them that was glory happy. I said, this isn't what it's about. It's about drawing money. And, there were a lot of great baby faces. And I thought, when I was in the business, it was a real big man's business. And I was 5'8" at best. And I said to myself, I'm going to always be a mid-carder unless I come up with something. Then I came up with the idea, and I said to myself, well, how do you perform this illusion? I always went to the ring first. In my matches, probably after a while, people got tired of it. But for 3 years, I worked with Dusty most of the time, Blackjack, Barry, and Andre. And the matches started the same way. I dived through the ropes. Yep, dive. I dived through the ropes, knocked them down, juiced them most of the time, and now I throw them back in the ring and they'd be prone. So, you're 4 feet taller in the ring, right? I'd stand up above them. Now I'm standing above 6'9" Blackjack Mulligan, 350 pounds, and it fists like hammers. People couldn't see how big he was. And all I had to do was stay on him and then flop around until I threw him back out on the floor, dove out on the floor on him, and he hit me one time, and then he would throw me back in the ring, whether it was Dusty, Blackjack, Andre, Superstar, the great baby faces I work with. And I wouldn't beg off, but when they stepped over the ropes or came through the ropes, I'd be on my knees. So the size difference was a pop for them. And I took my liability and tried to make it an asset. And I got away with it because I had guys that trusted me and thought, and it was Mulligan was the first one to step up and do it for me. And the first night that I really got a chance for the main event, he came to me and said, we were in Orlando, and Dusty said, let's do a DQ. And Mulligan says, no, he's going to beat me in the middle, and you're coming down, Barry's coming down, and leave all three play. And if we're going with him, let's strap a rocket on his back and let's go with him. And they did. Yeah, they did it, you know. And, you know, the guys, some of the guys that the stars that I was working with were really taking a chance because it could have fizzled quickly because it was such a strange gimmick. But the guys I mentioned, Mulligan took the chance because he was the first one to put his toe in the water. And for him to do that, because he had been, you know, Jack was one of the greatest talkers of all times and a huge money drawer and a huge man. You know, I mean, remember the Machines? It was him and Andre and was Bill Eadie. I mean, he was a huge man. Compared to me, he was a huge man. So I was lucky that I had great, great guys to give me a break.
You had turned heel in Georgia. You then went to Memphis. You then went to Knoxville. By the time you arrive back in Florida, you come as a babyface, but with the undertones of there's something different about Kevin Sullivan now. And of course, we know how it evolved and what it turned into. But when you first go back there and you're now, you know, in Memphis, you were a heel, but it was nothing like you in Florida. But when you start coming up with the ideas of what you want to be in Florida, what was the development of that gimmick like? And also, what was it like for you with so much experience in Florida, with such an amazing relationship with Eddie Graham, who thought of you like a son?
Yeah.
How do you go to him and approach him with really such a radical gimmick?
What I did was the gimmick took a life on its own. What happened was when I left Knoxville, I went to Georgia for a short period, and I was working Georgia and Charlotte at the same time because Ole was booking both of them.
Right.
Blackjack, Florida with Barry. Well, when I came down back to Florida, Barry, his brother Kendall, Blackjack, and a couple other babyfaces said, this ain't the same guy that left here. Mike Graham stood up for me. A couple other babyfaces stood up for me. So now I'm saying, hey, Mulligan, we all live in glass houses. You shouldn't be throwing stones. I'm really ashamed of some of the things I've done, blah, blah, blah. And Mike Graham keeps on putting up with me. Then we had the luxury of Steve Kern standing in an interview saying, Mike, this is directed right at you.
Yeah.
This guy's not the same guy. So we end up having a Florida tournament, and it ends up me and Barry, and I wrestled babyface the whole match, and we went almost the time limit on TV. There was 2 minutes left to go, and I go, and it was a wrestling match. I mean, a half amateur wrestling match. I go to leg dive Barry. He moves out of the way. I take a bump on the floor. He sits down, holds ropes open. I come back in. We shake hands. We continue on for about 3 more minutes. He goes to do something. I duck. He trips over me, and he lands on the floor. I hold open, and Mike is commentating with Gordon the whole time. What a wrestling match. What a wrestling match. And I hold open the rope. Barry steps in. As he does, I kick him right in the face and pin him 1, 2, 3. Mike jumps up, and I grab the belt. Mike jumps up and says, what are you doing? What are you doing? And Mike and I had to this day, I miss him horribly, but we used to do some crazy things when we were kids. And when he stood up, he was with Gordon. I said, I got to make this one look good. And I hit him with that belt and busted him open. And he was so pissed, he fell off the stool. He was so pissed, he started running to get me. And I said, I'm getting out of here. But you remember when you had buttons on your jeans where your fly was?
Yeah, yeah.
He blew all the buttons off, so he's chasing me. His pants are falling down. And he's grabbing his pants, and his striped undies are showing. Oh, it's hilarious. So what I did was, when I made an interview, and I said, there's no such thing as American dream. Most people have 2.5 kids to live in paycheck to paycheck, electricity bill, blah, 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 blah. And then Dusty came out and said, there is an American dream, I'm proof. And then we go on from there. And I started, MTV was brand new. Thriller, Billy Idol, White Wedding, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Ozzy Osbourne, Alex Cooper, Metallica. There was a lot of other groups too, right? That were on the dark side. Then the genre of horror movies, Freddy Krueger, Halloween, bunch of stuff. So I used to stay up at night and watch that stuff and write some quotes down. And I had been to Asia for quite a bit with Mark Lewin. And I learned some of the things about Hinduism and Zen, Buddhism. And I spent a lot of time in Singapore, Malaysia. And I kind of balled them up. But I then figured out, this is the 80s. You know what the movie was big was Scarface, right? So you know where I'm going. I started to put a light thing underneath my eyes, like I'm not sleeping. I started interviews like, Dusty, when I get you, I'm going to destroy you, and all that common sense interviews. Then I would turn sideways and say, like I'm talking to myself, like I've lost it a little bit, just like I'm starting to stammer. I turn around and say, I see you in that brown LTD. You're not going to catch me. And I think people would say, uh-oh, there's something more fishy here, Yeah. And every day, shit was happening in Miami. 122 million tons were caught, So I played that role, and then I played what I knew about the Asian culture and the Hindu stuff. And Abuddin was a Hindu fertility god, but I never showed him because most people thought Abuddin was the boogeyman, right?
Yeah.
Your boogeyman is different than my boogeyman.
Yeah.
Everybody's boogeyman is different. So is the boogeyman, my boogeyman is a short little thing that lives under my bed with claws and stuff. Yours may be 9 feet tall. Maybe yours is something else. So I was giving the people a story. And like you said, Gordon was the perfect foil to listen to my story and get enwrapped into it and say, well, there's something here. So without Gordon, you're right. That thing wouldn't have worked.
As things started to develop, and like you said, it kind of took on a life of its own. You would come back, and you're still a babyface, but right away, Steve Kern has a message that Kevin Sullivan's changed, so the ball is in motion. But as things start getting more and more revolutionary, because there had never been anything like that to that level done in wrestling, and you have Jake with you, and eventually you have Mark come in as the Purple Haze. I mean, do you talk to Eddie? Because this was all so different than anything he had ever done. What were his thoughts on the whole angle?
Eddie was there when I started. Because I remember when I kicked Barry in the face, he said I should have done something else for the finish. He was a stickler on finishes. But Dusty was the booker. It wasn't probably what he really wanted it to be, his company, but we were drawing pretty solid. So he was smart enough to understand that you got to evolve. Me and Dusty were nowhere near Funk and Briscoe, but maybe there was something there, the good versus out-and-out evil. So he went along with it, and he never absolutely... The only time he got any heat about it was one time some kids were cheering for me, and they got beat up, and their car got burnt down. And he was
Jeez.
Yeah, he was afraid of a lawsuit. But other than that, he just went along with it.
Do you think it ever went too far?
I never used the word devil, and that's Bill Apter's bullshit.
Right.
I mean, I still tell him that. I use the word Abuddin, and people in Florida never thought I was a Satanist. That's pretty stupid. And I mean, I still have people ask me. I went to I still go to church, and my priest just came back from an archaeological discovery in Jerusalem. And he said to me, and he doesn't know what I really did until just recently, he said to me, I watched some of the stuff, how did they put you as a Satanist? I said, it was a magazine article. He said, oh, just bad press. I said, yeah. And he said, Well, will you talk about Mormonism and how the connection there is in the cults? I said, I ain't getting into this, Father. You can do it on your own. That's what you get paid for, not me. But anyway, I don't think the people saw me as that. Maybe a few did, but most of them saw me as really a whacked out guy they were seeing the same thing with Billy Idol, but not as far. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Alice Cooper, but not as far. I had the leeway, and the bands didn't have anybody to play off to, and I had the best baby faces in the world to play off of, so it worked. And the only way that the devil was ever brought up was Dusty would say, I'm going to get you, devil. I'm going to get you, devil, but nobody else. Blackjack alluded to, I went by their van the other night and there was pantyhose hanging off out of the car and smoke billowing out, and it wasn't from the muffler. You know what I mean?
Sounds like a party. All right.
yeah, exactly. So, and it was a different time and a different era, and it was groundbreaking. And I see some now. Ray, Rotunda's kid.
Yeah.
He's I like his gimmick, and the Undertaker came along, and being undead
has its benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. Big, and he's done I believe he's drawn more money than anybody in the history of wrestling business for the longest period of time. I'm not going to say he drew the money that Austin did, but over the length of how many years has anybody lasted long drawing that money?
It's hard to say.
Anybody.
It's hard to say if you adjust for inflation, because then you could start making arguments for, well, how did Jim Londos do? Or, you can start doing that.
Yeah.
In the modern era, I mean, Undertaker, he's certainly at the top of that list. I mean, how many WrestleManias was he the true main event of?
Right.
What do fans typically say to you when they come up to you at a convention? Do they think that it's a devil worshiper, or what do they say to you?
No, most of them never bring that up, and most of them say, you scared me to death. Yeah. And they usually lump me in with the original Sheik, Mark Lewin, the Maniac Mark Lewin, and Abdullah, and, they said, I scared them as kids, so I guess I did my job.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. It was fun.
Once you get to Florida, that's when you really start seeing the influence of the Sheik on you.
Yeah, because I had worked with the Sheik quite a bit, and he was my wrestling idol. I mean, when I was a kid, I knew wrestling was all prearranged because I had wrestled amateurs for so long, and I knew you couldn't feel a guy by his hair. But the first night the Sheik came out to wrestle Spirisarion, the building moved, and I said, whoa, this guy's legit. How I figured out that guy's legit and everybody else is fake to this day still is amazing that he could do that, because he did. Terry Funk tells me stories about the Sheik going into the bank in Amarillo and speaking Arabic because he's Syrian, from Syria, and overturning things, threatening people, and getting arrested. I mean, he lived his gimmick. So, and the other thing was, in Florida, I lived my gimmick. I drove everywhere with my robe. I went to the gym in my robe. I went grocery shopping. So, it wasn't like, and I told people when I do seminars sometimes, I say, who are you? And they don't know who they are. They don't know who the character is. And then I'll have guys say to me, oh, I'm a tough guy that beats people up and they weigh 145 pounds. And I say, wow, there's nobody here to direct them. You know what I mean? Because, I probably at that time, from Eddie to Senior to Jim to Watts to Vince Senior, there was another great mind. Vince Senior, Roy Shires at his time. There was some great minds that could direct you. Now, I'm not so sure. I mean,
and those are all the places Bill Watts went. If you wonder about Bill Watts' mind, he went to work for Vince Sr., then he went to work for Vern, when Vern was at his peak in terms of creativity, and then he went to work for Roy Shire, who was a genius, And then he ends up with Eddie. And Bill Watts was a smart guy to begin with. And he figured it out. He figured out what makes it really click.
Yeah. And that was kind of the path I took too. But I had I went, Eddie Senior, Jim Barnett, and Jim and Bill were together in Atlanta. So I went, and the Fullers, who were very smart, Buddy Fuller. I had Shires, and then I was around Phil Robley. Phil doesn't get his due. Phil was very smart. He helped Brody quite a bit. I was around, and Bunksy and Terry. I'm still around Terry. I'm going to see Terry at December 1st in Los Angeles. He's wrestling again.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I went to his retirement in 1997 in Amarillo.
Yeah.
So
I went to it in 89.
It's interesting with Buck Robley. You bring up that he was a really good mind. And, when people talk about great bookers, there are like certain people that you right away go to, whether it's Watts or Eddie Graham or Roy Shire. But some of the guys who may not have had major runs in major territories as bookers, but were really creative, don't get enough credit. Buck Robley, even though he had great success in Mid-South, great Mephisto, Frankie Kane, another brilliant guy.
Brilliant. I'm glad you said that. Brilliant guy. Frankie Kane, brilliant.
When did you first meet him?
I met Frankie in 74. Brilliant guy.
And you never hear him brought up. He's never in the conversation.
Nope. People were afraid of Frankie. He didn't look like much, but physically he was right up there with the tough guys.
Yeah, Idol told a story to me once on his show where I guess Frankie, something happened in the ring with Wrestling 2. I think Frankie was only the manager that night, and Wrestling 2 came at him in the dressing room. You were there?
I was there. Macon, Georgia. He was wrestling Mark Lewin, and Chu thought he was tough, and Frankie kind of, during the match, flipped his keffiyeh, the headdress the Arabs wear.
Yeah.
When he's a great Mephisto. He flipped it, and Chu came in, and he threatened Frankie because he said, hey, you hurt my eye. And Frankie said, sorry. And he stayed on, and Frankie said, hey, let's go. And Chu said, okay. 2 punches. He was knocked out. 2 split eyes. So Mark said to him, let's go, Frankie. As they're leaving, they're going by me, and Frankie turned to Mark and said, did I embarrass you? Should I go back and hit him again? He said, no, Frankie was tough. You heard the famous story about him and Roy Shires, right?
What happened?
Frankie was the U.S. heavyweight champion there. So Shires could be a real ass. I worked for him. He could be a real ass. So Frankie comes out of the ring. They had a great house. Shires gets on him, and Frankie just beats him up bad.
Wow, really?
Shires said, knocked him out. Frankie was an ex-boxer, professionally. He knocked him out. Well, Shires had a huge ego. So that night he calls Frankie and says, listen, in 2 weeks we get the Cow Palace again. He said, I'm going to book you. He said, but I'm going to give you $1,000 to let me work and punch, but I'm going to knock you out. I've lost faith with the boys. Frankie says, okay. This is sort of like Idol. Idol might have got the idea of the Battle Royal check. Frankie took the $1,000, but paid for 2 weeks, and knocked Shires out again.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How difficult was Roy when you were out there at the end of the 70s?
One of the biggest mistakes in my wrestling career I made out there. Roy was a pain. He lost his big TV because he used to chew tobacco and spit on the floor on the TV station. He lost the major TV. So now I'm following Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens. And me and Roop do an angle with my father, where Roop shoulder breaks my father.
Yeah, maybe the last great angle that ever came out of San Francisco.
Yeah, it was. They used it and come back from Florida with that. So I we get 4 shows on top. Asa Calhoun, the referee, me for the U.S. belt, which I've been stripped of, against Roop for the 4th time in a cage. The only way I can lose is foreign object. Roy figures out a finish where Roop's going to drop the foreign object, and I'm going to hit him in front of Calhoun with it and get disqualified. They carried me to the ring and were trying to hang me when I left. But he was very difficult to work with. It was the end. He was out of ideas, but we came in and gave him fresh life. Stevens came in, wonderful guy. I said to him, Mr. Stevens, how do you want me to sell for you? We're tag team partners. He said, no, kid, this is your town now. Let me sell, and you make the comeback and take the finish. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
I mean, that's Ray Stevens. He shouldn't have done it, okay? So Roop gives us notice, and I'm being loyal. I give my notice. And Roy came to me and said, if you stay, I'll give you the U.S. belt. And that's when they weren't using the world champion out there on the whole West Coast. He said, we're going to use Hawaii, L.A., San Francisco, and Portland. And I turned it down. Everything works out, but I look back and say, wow. But, it wouldn't have worked because of Roy. It wouldn't have worked. Roy had been such a cantankerous. But I learned a lot because he knew he was a great high spot man, a great finish man, but he was so hard to get along with. If you said, hey, the sky's cloudy today, he'd say, no, it's bright blue and the sun's out. No, he's just tough.
One last question today, Kevin.
Yeah.
You're out there when everything goes down with Bob Roop and Roy, and like you said, Roy offered you a lot and you ended up leaving, and San Francisco ended up going downhill pretty quickly after that. But what are you thinking in 79 in Knoxville when Bob Roop makes the play again, this time against Ron Fuller, and this time he actually has guys who have his back and go with him, and it really destroys Knoxville?
It killed the territory, and Ronald was a hell of a guy. I remember this. I was on the semifinal on all the matches that week. I drove 330 miles, and one trip was 210. So that meant I drove 120 miles a week and made $990. And these guys wanted to push Ronald out of the business. They killed a great territory. It never really truly came back because of what they did. And the guys that followed Roop were blinded.
I always find it so weird because, here's Bob Roop, who for years was, the master understudy in terms of wrestling under Eddie Graham. When Eddie Graham wanted to teach a guy in the snake pit a lesson, it was Bob Roop who was going to put him in the sugar or chase him down the street, one way or another.
Right.
And Eddie's Mr. NWA. And then all of a sudden, Bob has the instance with Roy. And again, Roy had a reputation for being a pain in the ass, especially there at the end.
Yeah.
But in Knoxville, here's Ron, who, again, Ron was Mr. NWA because his grandfather had helped found the NWA, and him and his father had both been parts of the NWA for years.
And Ron had been vice president for a while.
Yeah, I mean, what was Roop? Like, where did it come from in Roop that he got it in his head that he wanted to run a promotion or book a promotion and push someone out? Because it happens twice in a row after years under Eddie Graham. Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from greed. One of the 7 cardinal sins comes from greed. You're just not happy with what you got, and you want what somebody else has. It killed that territory. It was such a wonderful territory to work. And the other thing, Ronald had opened up a southern end. Yeah. And I went to the southern end after I finished the northern end. I had 16 months of making money and never staying over. And I went to the southern end and was going to do well there too for Ronald. And then they just killed it. And they not only, when I say greed, not only were they greedy, they didn't give a shit about the other boys. Because they got to know that a little area like that can't take 2 promotions. And Ronald had more money than they did, and he could outlast them. They just didn't care about anybody but themselves.
And it would have been a powerhouse. 2 Southeastern promotions, one in Alabama, one in Knoxville. Right. It would have been a powerhouse, and guys would have been able to go back and forth and never get stale anywhere.
Right. And all you needed really was Florida to go, have 3 territories. You'd never have to leave the Southeast.
Boom! There it is, Kevin Sullivan Part 2. A fun time for me to talk to Kevin. We've had a lot of good talks lately. Again, mostly about baseball, but the wrestling talks have been really good too. And Kevin will be back on the show pretty soon. Kurt, I can't thank you enough for being in the co-host chair. You're one of the most popular co-hosts. I always have a blast talking with you. And, we were just kind of saying it off air. This may be the most fun we've ever had recording together.
I had so much fun tonight. I've had a fun time every time, but I don't know. There's something special about tonight. I just totally dug it. And thank you for having me. I love being part of this. It's, the history you are creating here, not so much the history, but the historical material you're creating here is three-dimensional. It's not just wrestlers. It's not just promoters. You're looking into the careers of my fellow indie geeks, of ring crew fans. I mean, this is a great work of history.
I really appreciate that coming from you, Kurt. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how they could stay in touch with you and anything you're working on right now?
Well, let's see. On Facebook, I am Vandal Drummond on Facebook. Please friend me. Never have too many friends, and want to thank the occasional emails I get from people, and just nice messages. And if for some reason I don't get back to you, it's not because I don't want to. I am a bit disorganized, and I can be a flake sometimes. But you guys are so awesome. 605 crowd, man. You guys are great. Would also like to, as I always do, point out luchaworld.com. Fredo Esparza does some great work on that site. And along with people like Matt Farmer, he is documenting current lucha and lucha history. He just put up a really good interview he conducted with the AAA wrestler Aerostar a few weeks ago. So many of the luchadors who come to town, I can't drive home how awesome they are. I think we've only had 1 or 2 people kind of give us the bum rush on interviews, but everybody from Aerostar, Los Traumas, Negro Casas, super generous with their time, and just, Fredo's documented some really good stuff. And I think the Aerostar, as far as the interviews, I think that was one of the best interviews he did.
Give that website one more time, please.
luchaworld.com.
Of course, you can follow the Super Podcast on Twitter at 605pod. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast, and you can follow the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network on Twitter at Super Podcasts. You can follow the Super Podcast on Facebook at facebook.com/superpodcast. Gives you a chance to vote for the top 10. Check out the exclusive Travis Heckle artwork. Chime in with your comments about the show. Join any of the things we talk about, from the what if to the killing of Tommy Rich. Let us hear you. We want your voice to be heard. Facebook.com/superpodcast. Also, the best place to reach this show. If you have a message you want to send in, that's where you should send it to me. Facebook.com/superpodcast. Of course, we also have the Mothership Facebook group. If you want to talk with other 605ers about things not necessarily just confined to the show. For instance, current wrestling, music, sports, TV, whatever it may be, you're invited to join. Facebook.com/groups/superpodtalk. All we ask is that you are already a follower of the Facebook page, facebook.com/superpodcast. You can support this show by using tinyurl.com/superpod, Amazon. Anything you add to your cart after using that link, if you make that purchase, this show gets a little bit of credit. Support this show. Keep it the way it is. Listener supported, not filled with ads from people you don't want to fucking hear from. Also, if you want to wear a 605 Super Podcast logo t-shirt, either in black or in gray, or a 605 Super Podcast polo shirt in navy blue or black, or the Yo Mamba 605 t-shirt, as well as the sticker sets and the magnet sets. And I believe the Paper Bag Assassin's working on some more denim stockings for this year. They sold out last year pretty quickly. So if you're going to want a denim stocking, get ready. I think we may have some other surprises we're going to throw in with that. But you can go to tinyurl.com/superpodstore to get all your Super Podcast merchandise. If you would like to make a one-time donation to the show, you can do so by going to paypal.me/superpodcast. Again, this show is listener supported. If you really enjoy it, if you really think what we are doing here is worth it, if you enjoy it that much, then consider paypal.me/superpodcast. Hey, perhaps you're a secret millionaire and you want to support your favorite podcast. You can also make monthly donations on an ongoing basis by going to patreon.com/superpodcast. Unlike other shows on Patreon, we don't give you any bonus items. You don't win anything extra for supporting us on Patreon. What you do is help keep this show the way it is. It's like PBS. You support this show to keep it the way it is for everyone else. If you are on iTunes, please leave us a 5-star review and a positive rating. It really does help this show out. And of course, you can access our RSS feed or download every episode directly from 605pod.com. This week's installment of In the News with Jim Cornette was brought to you by Ramsor Records. Visit ramsorrecords.kungfustore.com and enter the promo code 605 at checkout to save 20% on all orders. And don't forget Bombadil, whose fine album Fences came out earlier this year, is on their first European tour from November 22nd to December 7th. For more information, visit ramsorrecords.com. I would encourage you to check out the other fine shows available through the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Breaking Kayfabe with Jeff Baldwin debuts every Tuesday, available at baldwinpod.com, also on iTunes and everywhere else. Every Wednesday, Ron Fuller Studcast, available directly from fullerpod.com. Every Saturday, Kentucky Fried Wrestling with Scott Bowden at kfrpod.com. All Arcadian Vanguard shows are available on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. More shows to come. If you'd like to send anything into the Super Podcast, perhaps Weasel's World, you could do so by sending it to the 605 Super Podcast, P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962. That's the 605 Super Podcast, the Mothership! Yeah! P.O. Box 1242, Morristown, New Jersey, 07962.
Baby.
The 605 Super Podcast is a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. For Kurt Brown, I'm the great Brian Last. Until next week, tally-ho!